Enjoy the show. Good evening, everyone. And of course, welcome back. Yes, my friends, it's another very exciting episode of Red Pill News Live. Hope you guys are having a lovely day. Thank you so much for joining us. Caesar, I see you over there in the YouTube chat, man. It's been years. So good to see you. All right. Now, Shia Maria says also, I like Trump, and then I strayed from him for a few years, and now I'm back. We're glad to have you back. Here's the thing. Even for those people out there who don't like Trump or they don't like what he does, they don't understand, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, because President Trump is going to do the job of making America great again and doing what's best for the American people, regardless of who likes him or not. I mean, this is why I was attracted to Trump in the first place. The man is not a politician. I said for years, we need somebody running this country who is going to run it like a business. And that's what our man is doing. And even more than that, he is restoring the nation in ways that I never believed could possibly actually happen. But here we are. Oh, Jersey Break, you just killed a tapeworm. Good God. I'm glad that thing's not living inside you anymore, hon. All right, so what I need from you out there in the audience, if you haven't yet, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the thumbs up, hit the red pill, whatever it might be, whatever platform you are on. And then I need you to sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn. Thank you so much to Jackie Espada for the raid. We're going to be right back after this. So new inflation numbers are out of Washington, and it shows that once again, inflation is on the rise. That's another threat to you, another threat to your savings account, and of course, also your retirement. So you got to ask yourself an honest question here. Does your dollar go as far today as it did 10 years ago? Well, what about 5 years ago, even last year? Then what does the next decade look like for you and your savings? Because if your portfolio lacks exposure to gold, one of history's most reliable economic hedges, it's about time to rethink your strategy, because gold has kept up with inflation, and in many periods, it's actually outpaced it. My friends at Noble Gold Investments specialize in helping people protect their wealth using physical gold and silver. Whether you're going to roll over an IRA or make a direct purchase, their team walks you through the entire process, and they make it super simple. There's no pressure, just education and experience. And right now, all new qualified accounts are going to receive a free 1/10 of an ounce America Gold Eagle as a thank you. To find out, you can visit noblegoldinvestments.com/redpill78 and discover just how easy it is to protect your financial future. Once again, that's noblegoldinvestments.com/redpill78. And when you support my sponsors, you support this channel. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, that's the wrong button. This is the correct button. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Vice City GTA, I've got a special one for you today. It is my flamingo shirt. What is it? It's called the Tactimingo, because tactical guns, etc. Hence my set. Got lots of guns on the set. Anyways, you guys, we have a lot to discuss today. I want to open up with a bit of an update, as I tend to do. This is a story that we talked about last week. It's actually a story that took place back in November, but for whatever reason, the military and the FBI chose not to tell anybody until very recently. And as soon as they told the people of America what had happened, well, the people who committed the crime were almost immediately arrested. Maybe that should tell them something. They should tell us and bring us in, because if we have information, my goodness, we're going to go ahead and give it. So the Army has now ID'd the 2 suspects who were connected to the drone theft at Fort Campbell. As I told you when this was announced, Fort Campbell has had a series of security lapses over the course of the last decade or so. It might even go back farther than that. But we've had guns and parts being stolen from there, sold to our enemies. We've obviously had these drones get stolen. I believe there have been drugs that have been people have been found to have been dealing drugs out of there. Anyways, The Gateway Pundit had previously reported that these two people on screen were the suspects who had come in and stolen these drones. Now, after they were arrested, the Army let us know that they actually were people who had access to the base, which is exactly what we said when this first came out. It must have been an inside job. You just don't get onto a military base and then walk out with a couple of advanced military AI drones unless you're supposed to be there. So the person who initially spoke about this from Fort Campbell wanted everybody to know what they were supposed to look for. A couple of 4 Skydio X-10D drone systems that were taken from the 326th Division Engineer Battalion building. So they were stolen in November. The Pentagon and Fort Campbell released the public the photos on March 11th, and officials at Fort Campbell have announced that these suspects behind the theft of these drones have been identified, but they still have yet to release their names. I don't know why they're not releasing their names. Anyways, Fort Campbell has reported that the Department of the Army Criminal Investigative Division is leading this investigation. They've identified the 2 suspects. They have credible evidence to show that they're the ones who actually did the theft. And they also now have the possible whereabouts of the missing quadricopter drones. It's an active criminal investigation. Perhaps that's why they are not bringing these people forward. Maybe they want to make sure that there is an official indictment in place, but they are working to diligently resolve the matter. Now, I showed you the video of what these drones look like. You know, they look like drones, but they just have greater capability than the type of stuff that you're going to find at your local Best Buy or whatever. But as it is right now, we're still waiting for the IDs on these individuals. We just don't have it yet. Now, Chafed Bum says, I remember when Trump called out Barry on his fake birth certificate. I do too. I was actually watching as that was happening. I was really eager because I was aware of Barack Hussein Obama's sketchy background and the fact that his birth certificate was totally fake and his social security number was connected to seemingly a dead man who had been born in Connecticut, and that's, of course, not where Barry was born. And I was actually really disappointed when President Trump just dropped the whole thing and they stopped talking about it. Of course, we had the investigation by Sheriff Joe Arpaio and his team. And then you know what happened to Joe? Barack Obama went after him and put that guy in prison. I remember when Trump called out Barry for the fake birth certificate. He was the first Republican I ever saw punch back, and I knew he was my guy. I was born in 82. Right on, brother. I was born in 78. You know, I wasn't sure about Trump at that time. I guess I kind of felt like maybe he had just done the whole thing as a stunt. When he didn't pursue it to its logical conclusion, it made me think, well, geez, I mean, was he ever serious about it? Or is this just something that, you know, he's using to get headlines? But then, you know, when he came back around and he announced, when I saw him walking down that golden escalator and he gave his first speech, I was like 100%. Like, this is definitely my guy. And you know, what was the choices? You had Hillary Clinton, who I am relatively certain is connected to a whole string of unexplained deaths. There was no way that I was going to be voting for her. I knew about Benghazi. I knew about, you know, her very, very suspicious past. And then, of course, the WikiLeaks emails came out and there was like, you know, absolutely never going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Oh, shoot. That was not supposed to happen. All right. Now, so since we're talking about President Trump, my support for President Trump, some people might call me a sycophant. Some people might call me a cult member. That's absolutely not the case. My love and respect for President Trump is based upon a lifetime of observation of politicians and people in the public eye, such as him, and more importantly, through now 2 terms of President Trump's actual choices that he's made while the president of the United States, the policies he has implemented. Of course, the things that he says, I mean, that's a huge part of it. But ultimately, it boils down to the fact that he's not a politician. He does what he says he's going to do, and the choices that he makes are good for America. Now, CNN was forced into the undignified position of commenting on President Trump's remarkable popularity. Now, there are Republicans out there, and Republicans may or may not support President Trump. But the America Firsters, the people who identify as MAGA, those that President Trump really considers to be his base. And those could be people who were former Democrats, former independents, people who maybe consider themselves to be Trumplicans. We're talking about people who support the man because of his policy. CNN did a poll, and among the people they spoke to and asked questions about their support of President Trump, quite literally 100% of them support President Trump. Take a listen to this.
Yeah, you know, sometimes you look at the polling data and there are numbers that just jump off the screen at you, and this is one of those. Because just take a look here. MAGA GOP view of Trump. Approve 100%. 100%. If you are a member of MAGA and the GOP, you approve of Donald John Trump. 0% say that they disapprove. You don't have to be a mathematical genius to know you can't go higher than 100%. He is the 1972 Miami Dolphins. Yeah, you know, sometimes
the 1972 Miami Dolphins. I don't know shit about football, but I get that reference. Oh, my goodness. So that tells you everything you need to know. For the people who are paying attention, for the people who understand what America was like before Trump came on the scene, for the people who have been watching America be destroyed gradually over the course of their entire lifetime, I don't see how you can't look at what President Trump is doing, even if you don't agree with everything that he does. Okay, let's say that maybe there's a policy you think that you would do differently. Okay, well, you're not president, but maybe you should run. Maybe you don't like a decision that he makes on the battlefield. Okay, you don't have access to the intelligence that President Trump has access to. But all you can do is express your opinion. This is America. That's the beauty of America. But if you truly want to make America great again, then you understand that there's only one man who's ever really done that. There's only one man who's ever really believed that, and more importantly, being in a position to actually effectuate that change. And that man is Donald Trump. So how can you not support Donald Trump if you consider yourself to be part of the America First base? I just don't see it. So I love seeing that CNN was forced to report that 100% of the people they spoke to support President Trump. Now, I would say that there probably is a growing number of voices within the base who would like President Trump to say, hey, you know, we're done in Iran. We basically are done in Iran. But as I showed you yesterday, President Trump is using the situation in Iran to reform relations between a variety of nations in the Middle East. He's also using it to, I believe, get NATO into a position where it's no longer necessary. Yesterday, he had commented on perhaps leaving NATO. NATO does not exist without the United States of America. Now, the United States has also graciously offered to help ships that use the Straits of Hormuz to make sure that they get their ships through and that everything goes off without a hitch so that they can continue to get their oil and gas and all of the cargo that they need to go through there. And the reason President Trump said, hey, maybe we're just going to leave NATO is because he asked for assistance from the global community that are supposed to be our allies. And everybody turned their noses up and walked away and said, we don't want anything to do with the Straits of Hormuz. Well, President Trump puts this on Truth Social. He says, I wonder what would happen if we finished off what's left of the Iranian terror state and then let the countries that use the Straits of Hormuz, because we don't, let them be responsible for the so-called strait. Maybe that would get some of our non-responsive allies in gears and fast. Well, it actually did just that. It didn't take very long before Mark Rutte, who is the president of NATO, for him to come along and say, oh, Mr. President, we are 100% your allies, and we are definitely going to do what we need to do to support the Straits of Hormuz have got to be open. This is so typical. The United States has been the punching bag of the world for so many years. The United States has been the piggy bank of the world for so many years. Nations use the United States of America to do the difficult things that they don't want to do or that they're unable to do because they simply don't have the power projection that we have. And if it wasn't for us, then the Straits of Hormuz may be a very different place right now. Certainly, obviously, Iran would be a very different nation. But Mark Rutte says, Mr. President, we are definitely going to support you from now on because we don't use the Straits of Hormuz, guys. We make more oil, gas, coal, etc. than any other nation on earth. So why is it that we should spend our money to ensure that your ships are safe? How about you, Mark Rutte? Ball's in your court.
Of the ballistic missiles, of the nuclear capability is severely degraded. When it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, I've been in contact with many allies. We all agree, of course, that strait has to open up again. And what I know is that allies are working together, discussing how to do that. What is the best way to do it? They're working on that collectively to find a way forward.
I'll tell you how you do it. You just get off your asses, you get in your ships, and you go hang out. That's all it has to do. Because there's really no reason for the United States to do it, other than these people don't want to spend their own money, which is why for so many years we were paying for everybody else in NATO. Now, we've already begun a gradual pullback from NATO. I think that ultimately, when we're completed with the creation of the Golden Age, when peace reigns on planet Earth and there are no nations at war with each other, there will be no need for organizations like NATO or the United Nations to exist. The United Nations is already totally ineffectual. The Board of Peace already has more respect and more cachet on the global stage than the United Nations has. It's simply just a place for nations to go pound a gavel and feel like they're important. They don't make any decisions that are affecting us because, frankly, we have our own sovereign right to do what we want to do. And they really don't have anything that they can say to make any other nation in the world do what they want to do. The only thing they should be working on is making sure that peace reigns supreme. And President Trump has done that on his own. And he's going to continue to do it with the Board of Peace. Now, it's really interesting to me that Joe Kent gave his resignation letter yesterday. We already talked about the theory that perhaps he was a leaker. More and more people are saying that. However, yet we don't have any direct evidence to really show that that's the case. But his timing for leaving that position at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence certainly did coincide with an interesting set of circumstances. Today, there were security hearings that were taking place on Capitol Hill with Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, FBI Director Kash Patel, a number of generals. So everybody was there, and they were all answering questions about a number of things. Certainly the situation in Iran. Tulsi Gabbard was confronted by Mark Warner about the raid in Arizona. We're going to watch a great clip on that. But what's fascinating to me is the rationale that Joe Kent gave in his letter. He essentially said that Iran was not a threat and that the United States of America did it for Israel. It was like the easiest talking point and one of the main talking points that we've seen against President Trump doing anything. If the goals of the United States just happen to coincide in some way with Israel, then many people out there are saying, well, Trump is controlled by Israel. President Trump has also said that ultimately what Israel's goals are for Iran in the Middle East are not what the United States of America has planned for them, but we are the nation that is setting the pace. Now, it's particularly interesting when you understand what we talked about yesterday, that Joe Kent was shut out of security briefings, allegedly, that he was accused of being a leaker. It was also stated by someone online that Tulsi Gabbard had been told to fire Joe Kent, but she didn't. She was asked directly about that today, and she said that never happened. Caroline Leavitt has also come forward and said, no, we never asked Tulsi Gabbard to fire Joe Kent. But what's most puzzling about Joe Kent's position that he took yesterday is that it is completely in opposition to many different statements he's made in recent memory about the dangers that Iran posed to the United States of America. So we're going to take a look at some of these posts. And mind you, all of these are still available on Twitter. I had initially gone through and started like clipping a bunch of things out so I could just make a graphic. And then this article came out in Breitbart. So I was like, well, this is far easier. So on January 8th of 2020, Kent wrote, Trump's restraint shows that he wants a deal with Iran, and his red line is American loss of life and Iranian nuke development. On fundamental vulnerability claims, troops in striking range of Iranian weapons and proxies with no vital U.S. mission. Now, in that thread, he also said additional sanctions will only be effective if they address Iran's access to the Iraqi economy. Trump's responses have been very measured. He has gone against both R&D conventional thinking and advice. This is nuance that accounts for Trump's appeal with those skeptical of our wars. And he was absolutely correct then. He's still correct now. He went on to say, I personally think we should have crushed their ballistic and nuke capabilities, but Trump has a plan. He has definitely earned the confidence of any clear-eyed observer. What's so strange is that what Joe said 6 years ago he wanted to do is what President Trump did right now. Now, on September 29th of 2024, he wrote, important. Iran's goal in orchestrating October 7th was to break up the Abraham Accords because the historic alliance isolated Iran's terror regime. Trump used a balance of diplomacy, economic pressure, and targeted strikes to contain Iran, the embodiment of peace through strength. Israel's dismantling of Hezbollah would have been much more challenging, if not impossible, had Trump not taken out Iran's terror mastermind Qasem Soleimani. And in that same statement, Kent also credited prior U.S. policy with constraining Iran and linked the country to broader regional conflict, including, but not limited to, the events of October 7th. And then a couple of days later, on October 7th, he writes, October 7th because October 7th BC happened because Biden and Harris gave Iran access to over $100 billion. Now, that $100 billion obviously went into funding their war and terror efforts. Trump used diplomacy to build the Abraham Accords. He cut off Iran's funding and he killed key terrorists. America and our allies were safe and there was less war. No more neocons, no more appeasement. Trump 2024. So the statements that he made publicly, and even just a couple of months ago, let me show you. He did an interview with Sean. Where is it? Okay, hold on. I sent it to somebody else in a message, and I'm looking for that message because I know I have a ton of bookmarks that I'm not going to be able to get through. Okay. Yes, here it is. On Sean Ryan's program 3 months ago. Okay, so what did he say there? He said that American troops in the region are directly in danger because of Iranian proxies. So again, it just completely flies in the face of the rationale that he gave yesterday. He's also going on Tucker Carlson's program, and then he's also going to go on Mark Levin's program. I am going to be interested to see both of those interviews and see what else he has to say. Now, you guys know me, I am not above the possibility that Joe Kent may be part of some larger operation which may be designed to sniff out certain individuals within either the administration or the media across the board. And because it's just so flagrantly different than everything he said up until this point. That could be it. It could be that maybe the rumors about him being a leaker have some validity to them and he's trying to save face. Could be that someone got to him in some fashion and he said what he said, because if he didn't, then maybe something damaging about him was going to come out. I mean, this is Washington, D.C. politics, and unfortunately, blackmail is just how a lot of things get done. It's really too bad. So really just wanted to point out that there were some strange things that I found, and there's even more if you go and look at his X profile. And one of those things is that Joe Kent was following an Iranian minister. Hold on. History reopen, last close tab. He was following an Iranian minister that was just recently killed by the United States. How did I lose this tab? Huh. Okay, well, I guess I don't have it. I don't know what happened to it. But It was a strange follow for Joe. This is a Iranian cleric, government minister who had just recently threatened the life of President Trump, and I guess we killed him in an airstrike. But Joe Kent was following that guy. Anyways, this is also an update from those hearings earlier with Tulsi Gabbard. And, oh, yes, and then there's also the subject of his wife. You know, she writes, well, she's not a fan of President Trump. That's another thing that I also meant to say. Thank you for bringing that up, Bub Ganoush. You know, I mean, people have been influenced by the opinions of their spouses. And I don't think it would be the first time that perhaps a weak man allowed themselves to identify at a deeper level with the bad takes of their spouse. I am so lucky because Lisa is one of the most based people that you're going to meet. She's always been ride or die, and even on the things that we disagree with, she is not trying to force me to change my mind on anything. But you guys know a TDS-suffering white liberal woman, how they simply cannot bear to fathom the idea that men around them or in their lives might be a fan of President Trump or in a general sense might disagree with them. So there is that as well. She works for or she has done articles for The Gray Zone, which is I think Max Boot's publication. Now, The Gray Zone has done some good work, but they're generally pretty left-wing. And his wife was just busted for spying for another country. So, you know, I don't trust that them as an organization. But here, let's take a listen to Tulsi going through the success of Operation Epic Fury up until this point. Tulsi Gabbard also spoke out in defense of President Trump yesterday after Joe Kent announced his resignation, essentially saying what I had said before. The president was elected to implement the agenda that he chooses based upon the choice of the American people. And the president is the only person in the government who has the sole responsibility of the safety and security of the entirety of this nation and all of our assets and all of our people that are stationed all around the world. So clearly he would have access to intelligence that Joe Kent wouldn't, and even more so if he had been locked out of briefings weeks ago.
The ICSSs that operate.
Joe Kent's original wife was killed in a terror attack over in the Middle East. And what's also interesting about that is that he had previously essentially blamed her death on bad actors within the Central Intelligence Agency, security failures as a result of being too lax in the face of clear and present danger. And so now he's married to a left-wing liberal.
Operation Epic Fury is advancing fundamental change in the region that began with Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023, and continued with the 12-day war last year, resulting in weakening Iran and its proxies. The ICSS's the regime in Iran appears to be intact but largely degraded due to attacks on its leadership and military capabilities. Its conventional military power projection capabilities have largely been destroyed, leaving limited options. Iran's strategic position has been significantly degraded. The U.S.-led maximum pressure campaign and snapback of European sanctions added additional pressure to an already bleak Iranian economy, resulting in mass protests earlier this year that Tehran suppressed by killing thousands of protesters. Even if the regime remains intact, the ICSS says that internal tensions are likely to increase as Iran's economy worsens. Even so, Iran and its proxies continue to attack U.S. and allied interests in the Middle East. The ICSS says that if a hostile regime survives, it will likely seek to begin a years-long effort to rebuild its military, missiles, and UAV forces. Prior to Operation Epic Fury, the ICSS says Iran was trying to recover from the severe damage to its nuclear infrastructure sustained during the 12-day war and continued to refuse to comply with its nuclear obligations with the IAEA, refusing them access to key facilities.
All right. So, once again, Tulsi Gabbard, either she agrees with the president or she's playing the good soldier. And frankly, when you are chosen to be a member of the president's cabinet, you act as a good soldier. And if you disagree with them, you disagree in private. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the choice is POTUS's. So Tulsi Gabbard did not perform in these hearings today in the way that I think she should have. We'll talk about that. She held her own against Mark Warner because he was trying to essentially railroad her into saying one thing, and she obviously wanted to give a verbose and complete answer. So this is about a 4.5-minute clip. We're going to watch the whole thing. But Mark Warner is the one who was very concerned the day after the raid in Fulton County. We watched a clip of him essentially kind of freaking out at the idea that the director of national intelligence would be in Fulton County. And he said at the time, the only reason that the DNI should be there is if there was some malign foreign influence in U.S. elections. We do know that there has been, there likely still is, from a variety of different vectors. However, Tulsi Gabbard did not say that. And I was really hoping that in her testimony today, she was going to blow the lid off of how many different ways foreign actors have meddled in U.S. elections. Because up until this administration, everybody, the only thing that anybody ever talked about with regard to foreign actors was Russia, Russia, Russia. And I think that Russia, although, of course, they're going to do what they need to do to deliver for their people, I think that Russia's so-called meddling in U.S. elections was probably the least of our worries. There were plenty of other nations that I know with a certainty the United States was dealing with threats from. And for some reason, Tulsi Gabbard just didn't go there. I don't know why that is, but she did hold her own. So let's go ahead and take a listen.
Director Gabbard, the whole country knows that you were recently involved in a FBI operation to seize ballots.
Yeah, quick. We did our first check-in with the Just the News, John Solomon China reporting, which seems to be a confirmation of the Connex story that I talked about several years ago that went nowhere because it was transferred from Michigan to Los Angeles, and then the district attorney, George Gascon in Los Angeles, let Eugene Yu off the hook and then paid out $5 million, and then he fled to China, so nothing ever happened to him. But yes, we are going to be doing part 2 here in just a few minutes on the China infiltration story. TZ Burton, well, I think that even among independents, President Trump's approval rating is rather high. The point of that particular segment was that they only asked or only reported on what President Trump's approval rating was among people who identify as MAGA. And of course, I think most people would assume that it would be rather high, but the point is that it was literally everyone. So if they spoke to independents, they didn't report on those numbers. I mean, we've talked about it very recently across the board among Republicans and independents both. President Trump's approval rating is rather high. The only reason that it's as low as it is because of his disapproval rating among Democrats.
Director Gabbard, the whole country knows that you were recently involved in a FBI.
You know, she can't talk about an ongoing investigation. You're absolutely correct. However, we've just had a series of documents that have been declassified. And I just, again, I am not the director of national intelligence, so I don't know why Tulsi didn't go there. But I think that given the current debate that is being waged in the Senate over the SAVE Act, certainly the proximity of the midterm elections, she would have had plenty of opportunity to discuss the recently declassified information showing that, at least in the past, there was definitely malign foreign influence on our elections, on certain weak points within our election system. She could have talked about that. But of course, she couldn't have talked specifically about an ongoing investigation. But for whatever reason, she didn't.
Operation to seize ballots in Fulton County, Georgia. Yet this was despite the fact that the warrant showed no foreign interference or nexus. Matter of fact, the warrant was based entirely on conspiracy theories that have already been examined and rejected repeatedly. Now, where is the authority for you to involve yourself in a domestic law enforcement activity?
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I appreciate the question. As you know, I've addressed every issue you've raised in detail in a letter, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to do it in this forum. As you stated, Congress provided by statute ODNI with the responsibility of election security and counterintelligence in 2021. As you also know, ODNI has purview and oversight.
I know the history very well, but could you just
I am addressing the question. ODNI also has purview and overview over two domestic-related agencies, the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, both of which have purview over election security responsibilities to ensure the integrity of our elections. I want to correct one of your statements that you've made multiple times, which is false. I did not participate in a law enforcement activity, nor would I, because that does not exist within my authorities.
You were present on the scene. Are the photos of you on the scene false?
I was at Fulton County, sir, at the request of the president, and to work with the FBI to observe this action that had long been awaited. I was not aware of what was in the warrant or was not in the warrant.
And what was the president's specific request for you to go to? What was the specific request that was made by the president for you to show up in Fulton County?
To go and observe the FBI's activities on this issue.
So why?
When you look at the your question, sir.
Do you have the answer why the president was knowing about this affidavit before it was even served?
I'm not aware that the president knew about an affidavit before it was served.
Then why was he sending you to Fulton County?
This occurred the day that the FBI had it approved, their warrant approved by a local judge, and they began to execute this. To address your question, sir, about the foreign nexus question, in order for us to better understand the vulnerabilities in our election systems that may exist today as we look to 2026, and yes, we are very focused on trying to make sure that this election is one that the American people have
Director
faith,
Gabbard, I've got a number of questions. Director Gabbard, I have a number of questions. Let me ask my next question, please. You have not provided any of the required reports or briefings to this committee on foreign interference. This is the first threat assessment since 2017 that didn't even mention foreign interference. Last year, when you were already confirmed, it mentioned it at high level. Are you saying there is no foreign threat to our elections in the midterms this year?
As I stated in the outset of my remarks, this year's annual threat assessment matches the prioritization of threats and
Please answer the question, yes or no. Is there foreign threat interference to our elections this year? Are there foreign...
Please allow me to answer the question, sir. The intelligence community has been and continues to remain focused on any collection and intelligence products that show a potential foreign threat for those who are seeking to...
So far, there has been none then because you've made no reports. Excuse me, ma'am. If you want to ask the questions, you should have stayed in Congress. Please answer the questions.
I didn't ask you a question, sir. I'm trying to answer your questions.
So you're saying the failure to provide any reports or the failure to have any mention of a foreign threat assessment, I would draw the conclusion there must be no foreign threat to our elections in 26. So that brings me a question that I have for both you, ma'am, and Director Patel. There are reports that in 2020, the president was preparing an executive order to potentially seize ballots or bring in federal forces. There is a published report that there is a similar EO being drafted right now about 2026, citing China. Director Patel, do you have any knowledge of that draft EO?
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I do not, sir.
Director Gabbard, do you have any?
I do not.
Thank you.
So Mark Warner's questions are very telling. It's quite obvious that he is literally on the verge of panicking. He wanted Tulsi Gabbard to say something very specific. He did not want her to answer in that sort of general sense that she was attempting to get to. I mean, we know what Tulsi Gabbard's responsibilities are. She's obviously, as the Director of National Intelligence, overseeing the entirety of the intelligence community. That includes the FBI and the DHS, whom were both involved in that raid on Fulton County. Obviously, there was criminal activity, otherwise they wouldn't have been there, but she wasn't there to participate in the raid. She was merely there to observe, most likely to see exactly what was going on in reference to the security of our elections. Now, considering the fact that the threat assessment doesn't mention anything about foreign malign influence, if you take a look at past foreign malign influence references in those things, it's always been about Russia. Okay, there was no need to put anything in there about Russia. The only thing that I can think, and this is pointing to statements that have been made by John Solomon, is that there will be a separate malign foreign influence threat assessment that would be produced and then presented not only to Congress, but also to the American people. It is highly relevant. We've just had several documents that have been released to the public. And so the only thing that I can think is that she didn't lean on it because they have something spectacular that they want to bring out, something that will be highly relevant, highly consequential, and maybe that does coincide with an open investigation leading to a case of one form or another. Because Mark Warner and the Dems, they have used our weak and insecure election system to ensure that races around the country from top to bottom have been manipulated. And likely, there are probably a number of those people who are also on payrolls of some of those foreign actors. Of course, if that comes back to them, then Mark Warner or any of these people who are involved, they may be the subject of that investigation. But he essentially was saying, well, because you haven't told me, that means that there is nothing there. Well, no, I just think that business is not usual in Washington, D.C. right now. This is probably the top issue that we could possibly be talking about. Now, just for anybody out there who may have like a liberal friend or a neighbor or something like that, and one of the top talking points about the SAVE Act is that, oh my gosh, all of these people are going to be disenfranchised. They're no longer going to be able to vote. They changed their name because they got married or, whatever. They're moving to another state. Now they're going to have to prove their identity. Oh, good Lord. For anybody who is fear-mongering in that way, what the Save America Act will actually do is require each state in the union to run their voter rolls through that systematic alien verification for entitlement system. That is the database that DHS developed very early on in President Trump's administration, which they're using to ensure that illegal aliens and dead people are not receiving benefits, and in this instance would also ensure that non-citizens and dead people are no longer on the voter rolls. This system will automatically flag those people who should not be on the voter rolls, and it will remove them. It's not going to require anybody to actually re-register to vote if they're already registered. But if you're a person who's going to be registering for the first time, well, then you would go ahead and clear yourself by proving your identity, and then you'll go ahead and be registered to vote, and you will have a voter ID for the rest of your life. PJ Corrigan says, Ben, whose binning beans has been beaned by beaming bean bin by beaming bean bins? Love you, brother. Okay, love you too, man. Thank you for that. Also, thank you so much to the folks over there on Pilled. First of all, Trump 1 says, I'm ready for the news. Zach, thanks for bringing it. Thank you for that. Appreciate you. Red Gun 51, thank you for the 217 gold pills. Red Fish, thank you for the cookie. Dixie, thank you for the can. Filter Dog says, don't these drones use startup keys? I have no idea how they work specifically. Dixie, thank you again. No thanks, Joe says, thanks, Lisa and Zach. Happy Wednesday to you both. Great reporting. Bless you both. Stay safe. Thank you for that, my friend. Sean Joe, thank you for a can and a cookie and another cookie. He says, Zach, everyone wants Bondi, Gabbard, etc. to go off on deep state about corruption, etc. I am sure there are big cases against these people in the admin. Cannot be blurting stuff out. No, you are absolutely correct. I, too, am certain that there are a number of investigations that are currently ongoing. My only thought initially when I heard Tulsi Gabbard's testimony earlier today is that I think it perhaps could have been beneficial for her to lean into the information that has been released. But, of course, as I often say, I'm not part of the administration. I'm not privy to those conversations going on behind the scenes. However, John Solomon also believes that Tulsi Gabbard should probably go in that direction. He talks about a number of things that perhaps he feels she could have done differently. So let's go ahead and just take a listen to this.
Story that's much more compelling. If Tulsi Gabbard looked Mark Warner into the face and said, "Sir, we were told for 6 years that there was no foreign intrusions in our election. We've now indicted Iranians for hacking into one voter database. We now have evidence that 18 other states voted traded by China. And the reason you and I don't know about that is that a series of intelligence analysts and officers under Donald Trump and Joe Biden put party before country. They decided they were not going to tell the country, they were not going to tell the Congress, they were not going to tell the president of the United States that China did these things because they didn't want to give Donald Trump ammunition on his China policy.
Now, in reference to that, and in reference to the idea that ongoing investigations may be taking place, it is entirely possible that what John Solomon is describing there, the political pressure that was used by withholding that information to hamper President Trump from being able to implement his full agenda, could also directly tie back to members of Congress. Mark Warner easily could be among them. So despite the fact that we've gotten this recent information and these admissions of breaches into our election system, perhaps it is specifically tied to an investigation that if it was discussed, that would have been a little bit too far over the line. And of course, people in Washington, D.C. may have just absolutely lost their shit because they know that they're going to be screwed.
That is what the ombudsman concluded. On the record, there is a report that's been sitting with nobody noticing it. The Intelligence Committee ombudsman saying that the CIA intentionally kept the president and the country in the dark because they didn't like Donald Trump's policies, even used disparaging names to describe the commander-in-chief they're supposed to be working for. We ought to find out if any of those officers still work for the CIA because they should be fired. But she could have done that because she has all of this evidence. And by the way, she has a lot more evidence than what I've been trying to squeeze this out. She has oodles more evidence. It is more damning than what I've reported, and she's been sitting on it. Why? I don't know. She didn't deploy it today. The president knows of this evidence. The White House chief of staff knows of this evidence. They went into, I think Kash Patel has answered the imminent threat pretty interestingly on Iran. He's talked about China. He brought up the driver's licenses today. That was important. Ratcliffe seems a little bit more engaged, but Tulsi seems to just be roadkill. She's not using the data in front of her agency to tell a story that's much more compelling.
So clearly, John Solomon talking about much more damning information that may be in the hands of Tulsi Gabbard. Knowing that, it does seem unlikely to me that Tulsi Gabbard is simply not doing anything with this information. If the president knows, if Ratcliffe knows, if Kash Patel knows, the only thing that makes sense is that there must be a large investigation that is taking place. This would certainly fall under the statute of RICO. Now, this is what I titled the show. So recently we had gotten a tip that Ukraine had been communicating with the Biden regime to ensure that they would provide some type of assistance to him for the 2024 election to make sure that he came back into office so that Ukraine would have the assistance that they needed to continue fighting this endless war with Russia. Now, John Solomon says in this clip that he confirmed this morning that some foreign power, I'm going to assume it could likely be Ukraine. We don't know that yet. But they were routing USAID money to Joe Biden's campaign. Frankly, considering how many nations were receiving American dollars through USAID, of course, USAID operating as a CIA cutout, it could quite literally be any nation on the face of the earth. But certainly one of the largest recipients of USAID dollars would have been Ukraine.
I confirmed this morning, Steve. There's a foreign power that was discussing routing USAID money to Joe Biden's campaign in 2024. That was intercepted by our intelligence agencies. They should be driving that narrative with evidence. They don't know how to command the podium. They don't know. President Trump does. His storytellers don't. They react. They counterpunch. They let the other people throw the first punch like Tulsi today, and they don't tell the narrative.
So very interested to find out which country that is, which members of the federal bureaucracy were participating in that. If that was at the CIA, then clearly those people cannot remain there. But I think that this is likely one of the very reasons why President Trump went after USAID in the very initial stages of this administration. I've always said that USAID was the money cutout for the CIA. That was how they could get cash into war zones. They could get it into different nations. And then, of course, they would use that for destabilization efforts, for their stay-behind efforts, for Operation Gladio. So many different ways that American funds would then be used to essentially usurp the goals of the American people. Now, let us jump to today's release about the Chinese 2020 election interference. Here, Dr. Barry Zaloof, he's a member of the Senior National Intelligence Service, and he's reported that others in the intelligence community said at the time, I don't want my intelligence going to the White House where it will be used by that vulgarian in the Oval Office to support policies against China, with which I personally disagree, likely because these people are communists. Analysts inside the U.S. intelligence community sought to conceal evidence of Chinese influence efforts from President Trump during that 2020 election. Analysts making those disparaging comments about the president simply because they disagreed with him politically. Now, this particular revelation comes from a January 2021 report that was only just recently released. It was written by the Ombudsman, Barry Zaloof, who conducted a review of the spy community's handling of Russia versus China meddling efforts during the 2020 election. Again, the only mention of malign foreign influence for years was Russia, and clearly there was plenty of it coming from other sources. Now, among his conclusions was that intelligence analysts downplayed China's actions because they had disdain for the, quote, vulgarian Trump and did not want to support the policies and priorities of the Trump administration towards China, with which they personally disagreed. You also could say that it could have potentially had something to do with Joe Biden and the Biden crime family's long-standing ties financially and otherwise with China and the Chinese Communist Party. Now, with the U.S. intelligence community knowing since 2020 that Beijing had gained access to various facets of the American voter registration data and then was using that data to conduct opinion analysis related to the presidential election, and probably that was how they were able to print all of those fake IDs that they were going to be sending to Chinese citizens throughout America, allowing them to vote in elections. But this is not the only piece of evidence that points to the Chinese government's election interference efforts in the 2020 election. Although much of those activities that they committed during the 2020 election is still classified. Just the News has just done a thorough review of the publicly available intelligence assessments, federal indictments, foreign government warnings, and cybersecurity firm analyses. There's a credible source that has evidence that Chinese government-linked cyber hackers and Chinese social media troll farms took aim directly at the United States during the presidential election. They were specifically seeking to undercut President Trump during his run against now former President Biden. Just knowing that is so infuriating because they had consistently said Vladimir Putin meddled in the election because he preferred Donald Trump to be the person who was elected. And here we had very scant evidence to show that there was much of anything at all. And whatever there was seemed to be directed at both sides of the fence. It was at Democrats and Republicans. It was designed to just sow sort of discontent generally among the people of the United States. But here we have evidence to show directly China was working to get Biden elected. There's also plenty of indicators to show that Chinese intelligence and a variety of their law enforcement agencies, including several I spoke about yesterday, the Chinese State Security, MSS, and the Ministry of Public Security, the MPS, also played a direct role in 2020. Now, who is Zaloof? He's a longtime intelligence officer, and in this 2021 January report, he wrote, given analytic differences in the way that Russia and China analysts examine their targets, China analysts appeared hesitant to assess Chinese actions as undue influence or interference. These analysts appeared reluctant to have their analysis on China brought forward because they tended to disagree with the administration's policies, essentially saying, I don't want our intelligence used to support those policies because I didn't vote for him. Now, Zallouf actually discussed this report on a podcast back in 2021, and he actually quoted an analyst who was also working on Chinese interference efforts as basically saying, I don't want my analysis going to the White House. I personally disagree with him. An article in the Journal of Intelligence, Conflict and Warfare from 2023 also recounted a speech by Zallouf, who said that the intelligence analyst was quoted as saying, I don't want my intelligence going to the White House. Again, Dr. Zallouf went on to point out that the various errors in this way of thinking, intelligence belongs to the community. It's not a single analyst. Further than that, while analysts are entitled to like or dislike particular leaders, they are definitely not entitled to allow that to alter the intelligence products that they put forward. Everything is supposed to be without political bias. Now, the review that Zallouf produced also found that allegations of Russian meddling and Chinese meddling were being measured on differing standards. They would look at what Russia was doing and hold it to a different standard than what China would be doing. Russia may have taken actions that were determined to be influential or interference efforts, while if and when China was taking the exact same or similar actions, the ones taken by China would not be determined as influential or interference. Due to varying collection and insight into hostile state actors' leadership intentions and domestic election influence campaigns, meaning China supported Joe Biden, they paid him all kinds of money, whereas Putin seemed to be more friendly with President Trump. They simply couldn't have that. They wanted to make sure that their candidate was the one who ended up winning. So they actually changed the use of terms for influence and interference, and they associated those terms differently with the two different countries. He also found that the terms were applied inconsistently across the analytic community, that they were failing to explain properly these definitions as consistent with tradecraft standards. This is something that we've seen time and time again. Intelligence analysts and people within the intelligence community completely changing their approach to something simply because they don't agree with the politics of President Trump. Now, OD&I officials engaged with policymakers and said that these customers did not notice the result, particularly differences in the volume, frequency, and confidence levels of the intelligence coming from the China and Russia analytic communities on activities from their perspective. They were very similar in their potential effects, even though they were reported as being different. So this analytic ombudsman noted that multiple national intelligence officers wrote an alternative analysis memo in October of 2020. In that memo, they expressed alternative views on potential Chinese election influence activities, and these alternative views were met with considerable organizational counter pressure. But the person who was the DNI then, and also now the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, John Ratcliffe, agreed with the dissenting alternative views. Those were the ones that argued that China had, in fact, attempted to influence the 2020 election to undercut Trump's candidacy. So the ODNI's National Intelligence Council released their intelligence community assessment on foreign threats to the 2020 election in March of 2021. And the ODNI said at that time the majority view was that China did not ultimately try to meddle in the 2020 election, while the minority view, which was led by the National Intelligence Officer for Cyber and other teams, said actually China did try to influence the election. They directly wanted to hurt Trump's prospects. We assess that China did not deploy interference efforts and considered but did not deploy influence efforts intended to change the outcome of the election. We have high confidence in this judgment. China sought stability in its relationship with the U.S. They did not view either election outcome as being advantageous enough for China to risk getting caught meddling. That was the majority opinion, obviously completely wrong. So they stated that the IC assesses that Chinese state media criticism of the Trump administration's policies related to China and its response to COVID-19 pandemic remained consistent in the lead up to the election and was aimed at shaping perceptions of U.S. policies and bolstering China's global position rather than to affect the 2020 election. So we assess that Beijing's risk calculus against influencing the election was informed by China's preference for stability with that bilateral relationship. Their probable judgment that attempting to influence the election would most likely damage the relations with China and the U.S., and a belief that the election of either candidate would present opportunities and challenges for China. So Beijing probably judged that Russia's efforts to interfere in 2016 had significantly damaged Moscow's position and relationship with the U.S., and may have worried that Washington would uncover a Chinese attempt to deploy similar measures to influence or interfere in the election, and then they might punish Beijing. The majority of you also said that China probably has continued longstanding efforts to gather information on U.S. voters and public opinion. See, they said it probably happened, even though it definitely happened. They might also be looking to gather information on political parties or candidates and their staff. What do you think they do with the information on the staff of political candidates? They gather that information so they can see where they can possibly manipulate or compromise someone. And they also might look at senior government officials, but we assess Beijing probably sought to use the information only to predict electoral outcomes and to inform its efforts to influence U.S. policy towards China under either outcome. But Beijing never interfered in the election structure. So the National Intelligence Officer for Cyber at the time, a man by the name of Christopher Porter, we spoke about him yesterday, assessed with others that the Chinese actually did indeed try to undercut President Trump in his re-election bid. The National Intelligence Officer for Cyber assessments that China took at least some steps to undermine President Trump's chances, primarily through social media and official public statements in the media. And they had moderate confidence in this assessment. So the National Intelligence Officer also assessed that some of Beijing's influence efforts were intended to at least indirectly affect U.S. candidates, political processes, and voter preferences, meeting the minimum definition for election influence used in this report. This view is different from the IC assessment because it gives more weight to indications that Beijing preferred former President Trump's defeat and the election of a more predictable member of the establishment instead, i.e. Joe Biden, and that Beijing implemented some and then later also increased its election influence efforts, especially over the summer of 2020. So the NIO assesses these indications are more persuasive than other information indicating that China decided not to intervene, essentially stating that the official opinion of the DNI at that time and the rest of the intelligence community that was operating against President Trump were totally wrong. The biggest takeaway from this is that the intelligence community of the United States government has always been the greatest threat to President Trump because it's that enemy from within, that fifth column of political bias and bureaucracy that worked against the best interests of America, worked against the efforts of the president to try to secure our system. And it was quite literally, you can lay at their feet what happened in the 2020 election. I would suggest that if things had just been reported differently and if they had been honest with the entirety of the administration, then perhaps certain efforts may have taken place. You might also argue that President Trump knew all of this because there was not the popular support that would be necessary to rationalize some of the changes that I think a lot of us believed needed to take place back then, that perhaps President Trump was aware that this was just going to have to be an unnatural and unfortunate pain period that America would have to go through so that all of these things could be revealed. And they are being revealed right now. Now, of course, John Ratcliffe, being one of those people who agreed with this minority assessment, released a letter in January of 2021 where he stood by that minority assessment and said that China did try to influence the election. And the DNI argued that the majority view was completely incorrect and that the original ICA gave a false impression that what China did was not influential and had no effect. But in fact, it actually did. So now that he's the CIA director, of course, many people want to know if things are changing in the CIA. Certainly, President Trump cannot be successful if that same bureaucratic, brick wall is in place, stopping realistic and honest intelligence assessments from being presented, investigated, and delivered. And if John Ratcliffe running the CIA is just doing it business as usual, then that's exactly what we're going to get. He, however, wants everybody to know that that is far from what we are seeing currently.
Last year when I was here in my confirmation, I promised you all, and you had all asked for, a more aggressive CIA, one that was focused on core mission, getting back to stealing secrets, to be able to provide our policymakers with a decisive strategic advantage that would allow and advance and contribute to foreign policy and national security successes. To the credit of the CIA workforce, the CIA has delivered. Some of those successes have been very public. As you mentioned, Senator, Operation Midnight Hammer, Operation Absolute Resolve, flawless military operations like that are hostage to a flawless intelligence picture. And the CIA, as you know from classified briefings, contributed in myriad ways to the success of that. But what I would say to you is those successes are just emblematic of the phenomenal progress and success really by every measure, every metric, every standard across every national security space with regard to the work of the CIA. Senator, you mentioned some of it in your opening. The increase of our asset stable and our human sources up by 25%, our FI collection across the board, our foreign intelligence collection up by 25% overall, and in important categories like China, for instance, up 100%. In areas like tech and AI, up 45%. On the counter-narcotics front, our operations up by 70%. And with regard to counterterrorism, those are classified numbers that I'll share with you in the classified portion of this hearing, but they're off the charts good.
All right, so obviously notable that he mentions China and a 100% increase in their data collection and their efforts. Across the board, it would appear that the CIA is back to its core mission rather than working to destroy the president of the United States. As I'm sure you're all aware, much of what the CIA does is all going to be classified. However, it would appear that President Trump has all the confidence in the world necessary to enjoy the job that John Ratcliffe is doing. And ultimately, the proof will be in the pudding. When and if we get the full reveal, a statement from the administration and those heads of the intelligence agencies, along with, hope to God, some type of a series of indictments that comes along with that, that's the best thing we can hope for. And as time moves forward, we get closer and closer to the midterm, people get more and more nervous. I do have all of the confidence in the world in the people that President Trump has put together, so I will continue to watch and comment as we move closer. But I believe that there's no way that they can't do what I've been suggesting. At some point, there will be a conversation about this, and perhaps the things that I've suggested I wish they would have talked about, that will be what is talked about in the classified portion of the briefing, just due to the sensitive nature of it and how directly those foreign malign influences have influenced elections here in the United States in the past, because we know they have. Now, we're going to check in with the situation in Texas, because Unite for Freedom continues to analyze the primary election that just took place. They say, what if I told you there are thousands of vote records that demonstrate violations of Texas law right now under the nose of authorities? In Texas, you don't pick a party when you register. You pick it at the ballot box. So by law, once you take that primary ballot, you're locked in for the year. You select if you're a Republican or a Democrat, and then for the rest of the year, if there is an election, you have to vote in that political party. By law, once you take that primary ballot, you're locked in. There's no switching. There's no double dipping. It's even printed as a criminal warning at the top of the signature roster. So this is why it's a problem in Texas. A person commits a criminal offense if the person knowingly votes in a primary election or participates in a convention of a party after having voted in a primary election or participated in a convention of another party during that same voter year. we look at the data, and it's quite clear that there are many people who are doing just that. So from their analysis, they have taken a look at these primary records, and they've identified 3,534 ballot records that are linked to 1,741 unique voters, which means that these individuals appear in both the Democrat and Republican primary data. Every single one of those is a felony. Every single one of those is multiple votes. So these are voters that oscillate but remain, and ones that oscillate and disappear. Those ones we spoke about yesterday. Those are the voters that will appear on the voter rolls, and then you take a look later and they've been removed. And then they're back, and then they are removed again. Voters that end up with a record in just one primary, voters that end up with a ballot record in both primaries, and even voters who have ballot records in both primaries but end up with no records in either by the end of early voting. They ask, why does that matter? Well, it matters because it's not just a glitch. Under Texas Section 162.004, voting in the primaries for two political parties is a criminal offense. Yet we look at the data, and it's quite clear that this is happening at scale. And with those numbers right there, although it is relatively small when you take into account the entirety of Texas, it can be, and likely has been, enough to select a winner in an election who probably should not have been the winner. It says in the law that it's impossible to do this, but the data shows that it's actually happening. And this is probably not an isolated incident. This is likely something that has happened on numerous occasions. So then you got to ask yourself, who's actually running this system? Who is the one who's making it possible for people to vote illegally in multiple primary elections? You also have to ask the question, do the people whose ballots are being cast in both Democrat and Republican primaries, are they even aware that this is happening? Are they living people? Are they just simply names on the voter rolls? Are they illegals? Are they dead people? Are there real people who have been taken advantage of and they've had their name used fraudulently to cast ballots for somebody that they don't want to vote for? Well, all of these questions hopefully are going to be answered. And again, I'm going to be trying to get Harry Horry back on the show on Friday so that we can go over the sum total of the findings of Unite for Freedom up until this point. Obviously, there is a lot to go over. Okay, now, one thing that did come out of this hearing today that I thought was really interesting is a report from Kash Patel that Scott Bessent at the IRS and Kash Patel at the FBI are launching a new initiative to investigate NGOs and nonprofits that are linked to domestic terrorism. So these are the organizations that have been using our tax dollars to fund organizations like Antifa, or these many different radical left-wing groups, many of which are currently battling the Trump administration in court and getting a free pass from all of those radical left-wing judges that have infected the judiciary. So AG Pam Bondi has recently issued an order to law enforcement agencies to prioritize investigations and prosecutions for groups that are fomenting domestic terror. Again, that's an order that came from Pam Bondi, which means it's an order that came from the president. Of course, Pam Bondi didn't hold a press conference for this. She goes and talks about other things that people don't like to hear from her about. But I think that it shows a certain savviness to her mindset. Whether or not Pam Bondi is asking for these things to happen behind the scenes, she gets people talking every time she goes and does an interview, positive and negative. And there are a lot of people who would tell you that there is no such thing as bad press. All press is good press. Scott Bessent, of course, is the commissioner of the IRS. And we've said previously, Scott Bessent is following the money. He said, we have started to compile lists. We've put together networks, and there's a long record here. And we don't know how much of the support's coming in from overseas. Whatever it is, it's notable. But we don't know how much money is being supported by U.S. nonprofits. Those are the 501c3s that give money to the 501c4s. But this is mission critical for us right now. This investigation began at some point in the past, and we've already had the prosecutions of the 9 Antifa insurrectionists in Texas at the Prairie View facility, the ICE facility. When you see these groups where all of the signs match, and they have hundreds of the same umbrellas that they're using, after they close the mayhem, they have the same lasers that they're using to blind our police force. How are they constructed? Because this takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of organization. So Scott Bessent is the money. That's the investigation. The FBI follows up with the criminal investigation. And together with the Department of Justice, they will prosecute these 501c3s, and they will determine where this money is coming from. And I guarantee you, plenty of it is coming from overseas. We're probably going to find that plenty of it was coming from USAID, and plenty more will be coming from individuals who simply want to see this country fall. So I'm super excited about this announcement. G. Fontes says, would be nice had Director Gabbard mentioned there's still 30 states refusing to submit voter rolls that have constitutionally obligated to, while harboring millions of foreign nationals. Well, it would be, but of course, those are things that are not necessarily under her purview. I would not be surprised if Harmeet Dillon was testifying. I think that would be something that she would testify to. And then, of course, millions of foreign nationals, that would be something I would expect Tom Homan or perhaps Mark Wayne Mullen when he becomes the Secretary of DHS. So while there is a lot of overlap between many of these subjects, each and every one of these cabinet members has a very specific lane that they're supposed to be paying attention to. So I was not necessarily surprised that she didn't say that. All right, now, earlier today, right around the same time that these heads of the intelligence community were testifying, Mark Wayne Mullen was in the midst of his Senate confirmation hearing, and it got a little testy. He was being questioned by Rand Paul, who is serving as the chair of the committee that was grilling him. And Paul questioned Mark Wayne Mullen on prior comments that he had made. He referred to Rand Paul as a snake in the grass, and he said that he could understand why one of Paul's neighbors assaulted him. Rand Paul really, really did not like that. And Mullen basically said, hey, listen, I say what I think, all right? And I've seen the way people operate in Washington, D.C. You generally do not support Republicans. You don't support the president. And the way that you behave, I could understand why perhaps somebody might actually want to get into it with you. And I believe we've got that clip. No, that's not it right here. Hold on. Here it is. Here it is.
You did many interviews.
No, that's a different one. Well, I said the gist of it. Hold on. Let me actually go to my bookmarks. I think I might have it in the bookmarks. No. Nope. No big deal. So yeah, they got into it, and Rand Paul took great offense to it. Now, President Trump shared this out earlier. It would appear that the Border Patrol Union is fully endorsing Senator Mullen for the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. They put out a letter in which they directly addressed the members of the committee. Oh, another thing that Rand Paul did, he wouldn't allow Mark Wayne Mullen to be announced by a fellow member of the Senate. The whole thing just seemed very petty. And I know that Rand Paul likes to consider himself to be a man of principle, but quite often his principled stances clash with the necessary moves that must take place if we're going to implement the president's agenda. And so he comes off as childish sometimes. He comes off as somebody with an axe to grind who takes offense at things, and then he won't give you his vote because he's just acting like a little bitch. So effectively, we have no doubt that Mark Wayne Mullen is the right person to lead DHS and continue the Trump administration's focus on keeping America safe. Much like President Trump, I like that Markwayne Mullin is a plain-speaking man. He's not going to sugarcoat things. He may not always say the right things, but I would rather have people just be honest than have people say what their PR representative told them to. And Rand Paul seemed to indicate that Markwayne Mullin's temperament was not correct for the Secretary of Homeland Security position. Seems like he stands alone in that. Even John Fetterman says that he's going to be voting for him. So I think it's only just a matter of very soon, in a matter of time, Markwayne Mullin will be the Secretary of Homeland Security. Now, let me say thank you very much to Sean Joe for 3 cookies. Thank you to Filter Dog for the cookie. Thank you to Filter Dog for another cookie. He says, yesterday, the White House has officially registered these URLs. You beat me to it. Yes. The White House, the Executive Office of the President, has just registered 2 new URLs, alien.gov and aliens.gov. Undoubtedly, that is for the forthcoming release of information about UAPs and extraterrestrial life that President Trump has tasked the Pentagon with releasing. So keep your eyes on those 2 URLs, alien.gov and aliens.gov. We will undoubtedly be going over it here on the show. Also, Mea Tua, thank you very much for the can. All right, before we talk about Sheriff Grady Judd, and I think this is probably going to surprise a lot of people, and I would also suggest that it's probably going to kickstart somebody to run against him in his next election. He was just reelected 2024, so there should be another election coming up in 2028 where if you want to run against Grady Judd, you might be able to do so. But I have a quick message from our friends over here on Rumble. You guys know that America is coming up on its 250th birthday very, very quickly. We've got a series of celebrations that are set to take place here in the United States. That's 250 years of freedom, grit, sacrifice, and the greatest experiment in self-governance the world has ever known. This is the perfect moment to help your kids or your grandkids understand why this country matters, not just for the obvious stuff like fireworks, baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, the story behind it all. There is now a free guide. It's called The Kid's Guide to America's 250th Birthday, and it's obviously a great way to introduce your kids to how America began, who the founding fathers were, what they risked, why the ideas they fought for back then still matter today. The guide is going to take those kids back to the moment when those brave men signed the Declaration of Independence, and they knew full well at that time that they were putting their lives on the line for freedom. It's going to break it all down in a way that kids can actually understand and enjoy, and it's not going to water it down or make it like boring schoolwork. So if you care about raising kids who know where this country came from and why it's worth preserving, this is something that you're going to want to grab. But the best part is it's completely free with this special offer. All you pay is $2 for shipping and handling. To pick it up, just head on over to freeusabirthday.com. That's freeusabirthday.com. And the Kid's Guide to America's 250th Birthday is there for your kids today. America's story matters. Make sure that the next generation knows it. You can use that QR code that you see on screen as well. Thank you very much. And also thank you to Renee, who says, speaking of money, I'm hearing RESPECT for Zak, getting us the news. $5 challenge, y'all. Thank you, Zak. Thank you so much, Renee. I do appreciate you, and thank you for supporting the program. All right, so if you are not a resident of Florida, you may not be aware that Governor DeSantis had put together a group of conservative Florida sheriffs to essentially advise on immigration enforcement down here in Florida. There is a there's like, down here in Florida, we are like one of the greatest places that you could be if you care about enforcing immigration, because all sheriffs in this, virtually all sheriffs, are set up already to work with ICE. There have been a couple of holdouts who said that they wouldn't, and essentially the governor just slapped them down and said, if you don't do this, then we're not going to be supporting you as a jurisdiction any longer. But there was a public meeting where Grady Judd and the members of this council that was put together by Governor DeSantis got together, and Grady Judd apparently has called for the administration to stop arresting people if they don't already have a criminal history. Now, I was blown away to hear this. Now, right here, it says Grady Judd and Florida sheriffs don't want mass deportations for undocumented immigrants without a criminal record. First of all, they're undocumented aliens. And just because they don't have a criminal record here in the United States doesn't mean that they didn't commit a crime in their home country. And they broke the law by coming into the United States of America illegally. So this was reported on. A lot of people were like, zero Fox given says, so as it turns out, Grady Judd is a fraud. I was like, this can't be what he said. There must have been something else to this. But right here, in a direct quote, Congress, they need to get off their butts and they need to fix it. Well, the fix is already being prescribed. It's against the law for aliens to enter the United States without coming in through a port of entry. The only fix that I could see is to change it from a civil infraction to a criminal infraction. If it's decided that it's a criminal infraction for people to come into the United States, then perhaps people would have no qualms about arresting those people. But Grady Judd went deeper. Now, Florida's Voice, I've had a lot of things that I have seen reported in Florida's Voice that I was, great. They're doing this honestly. I like it. But here, they appear to be really kind of giving Grady Judd a much more, the interpretation of his comments seems to be rather kind. So here it says, Florida's Immigration Enforcement Council Chair, Polk County Sheriff, says reports of a shift away from strict immigration enforcement are wrong. He says the meeting was public, law enforcement still backs ICE, and the focus remains on prioritizing dangerous, criminal, illegal aliens. All of those things are true, but the substance of the claim is ignored. Now, the other part of that claim is that allegedly Grady Judd and these other sheriffs on the council who want the enforcement emphasis to be changed to only focus on aliens that already have a criminal record was supposed to be asked to the president in a letter from these sheriffs. Now, Judd says, we are literally overrun with arresting those that are violating the law. And I'm sure that they are. However, I don't know about you guys, but I voted for mass deportations, okay? I want all of the people who have broken the law since they've been in the United States to be arrested and kicked the hell out. But not only that, I want every single individual, regardless of their criminal record, to also be kicked out if they are not here legally with legal status. But let's hear the quote from Grady Judd in this clip.
Listen to me, folks. There's 2 times worth of work enforcement to deal with them. And for the law enforcement agencies that aren't appropriately dealing with them, get on board and get with it. That's important. But at the same time that we literally are overrun with arresting those that are violating the law, that are here with illegal, that are here because there's warrants of deportation, because they've been ordered out of the country, because they've not done what's appropriate. That's a full-time job for all of us.
It is, and it should be, because those people have broken the law. Now, Grady Judd had said that the characterization of his comments was incorrect. He is not saying that they are going to do anything different. They've got plenty of people to arrest. However, he did make these following comments, which directly echo the claims that were made about his comments. Take a listen to these 2 clips from this news conference.
And
what he says here floored me, because essentially what he's talking about is some type of amnesty, and that is unforgivable.
We suggested yesterday there needs to be a path forward for those that are in this country. They came here illegally. They violated the federal law, but it's a civil violation. Currently, they have no criminal history. They're not committing crime. They're employed. They're not on government assistance. They're not creating problems. Their children are in school. They need to be required to speak English through a program. There needs to be evidence of positive community integration into our society. But those people who are adding to the American dream and enjoying the American dream that came here illegally, I might add, but they're doing good and they're not a drag on society. They're in fact helping society. We need to find a path for them.
That is the biggest line of bullshit that I have ever heard. First of all, he lays out a whole series of hypotheticals. Well, you know, for the people who are here and they're working and they don't have a criminal record and they're paying taxes and they're not doing bad stuff and they're not getting welfare, like, I'm sorry, but the vast majority of the people who come here and do it illegally, they are getting taxes, they are receiving welfare, and they are a drain on American society. They are taking jobs from the American people. If you came here to this country illegally, you are, by the very definition of your presence here, a criminal. But what's most shocking to me is that he says people who do not have a criminal record here, when we have established on so many different occasions that just because somebody doesn't have a criminal record here doesn't mean they haven't committed crimes. How many stories have I talked to you guys about where criminal illegal aliens have their charges dropped and then they are released back out into the community and they're free to go ahead and reoffend again? You only become someone with a criminal record when you are charged and then successfully tried for that crime, which leaves you open to having committed as many crimes as you want to until somebody does something about it. So no, I'm sorry, I am not okay with any form of amnesty, and I'm very shocked, frankly, to hear Grady Judd suggest that something like this needs to be done. Now, what he's referring to here is the need for Congress to take action, because this is only something that could be done by Congress. But he's also describing, I mean, he's talking about how busy Florida law enforcement is right now dealing with this problem. Well, this isn't a problem that just started. Okay, this has been ongoing for quite some time. There was just little to no enforcement of it. So it's a problem that could have been dealt with at some point in the past. But what he's describing is essentially the need to create a new bureaucracy or another set of full-time jobs to even evaluate the set of criteria that he lays out. I'm sorry. I mean, I've really respected the work that Grady Judd has done, but I think that he stepped in it here. I really think that he stepped in. I think that any sheriff who thinks that amnesty of any kind is a good idea is sorely mistaken, because that is not what we voted for. Now, here is another statement that he made at this press conference.
To dispel the hyperbole that there is some break from what we should be doing or what the President of the United States and the governor has asked. That's just not true. It's media rhetoric. And I want to make it abundantly clear that we in Florida law enforcement wholeheartedly support and endorse ICE. We fully cooperate with them, and I might add that they fully cooperate with us. In fact, they're excellent to work with. I can't say enough good about them. The issues that you have seen in other states, quite frankly, were created by the states themselves because they would not allow ICE agents to work in the jail and identify those that were there illegally, not only committing crime in this country, but certainly being in the country while they committed crime illegally, and many of them already with deportation warrants.
All right, so this is where I wholeheartedly agree with Grady Judd, because Florida has been the sort of platinum standard of how law enforcement should be cooperating with the federal government. But we do have plenty of people who are here illegally who may not have been caught committing a crime yet. But from my perspective, that is no reason to offer them some special status. And to be frank, The federal government has already given them a pathway to do what Grady Judd is suggesting. If you are here illegally, regardless of whether or not you've been convicted of a crime or have a criminal record, the DHS has offered a cash bonus for you to come in and self-report. They're going to give you a plane ticket, and they will send you out of the country. For the people who have ignored that offer coming from DHS, I can only believe that they fully intend to remain here as long as possible, continuing to take advantage of the United States of America. And simply because somebody has children who are in school or they have some kind of a job, that is not reason enough for them to remain here. Every single illegal alien in the United States of America lessens the sacrifice and the effort of every single legal immigrant who comes to this country, who goes about it the right way, who gets their paperwork, and who truly does integrate into American society. Many of those people that Sheriff Grady Judd is referencing, the people who have not yet been convicted of a crime, I would suggest that plenty of them don't speak English. And they're also continuing to ignore the directives of the administration. Amnesty is not the way. And I am glad to see that they are continuing to operate in the way that they have. I didn't get that from anything that he said, that they were going to do things differently. Only the idea that he was suggesting that there should be some type of program to basically take a little bit of this burden off of them. If anything, I think we need to continue to keep hiring more and more ICE agents, continuing to deploy them to places where we know illegal aliens are, and continuing to remove them. Because, again, anybody who's here illegally is a criminal. If there is anything that's done in Congress, Congress needs to change the law to make it a criminal offense rather than a civil offense to enter this country illegally, so that every single one of them immediately is now considered a criminal illegal alien by the very definition of it. So I don't know. So we'll see. But there's a lot of outcry about these statements that I saw online. A lot of people felt very, very, they felt betrayed by Sheriff Judd. Now, the sheriff of Jacksonville, TK Waters, has come forward after this meeting, and he said that he does not think that we should reconsider not deporting illegal aliens. Mass deportation is the way to go. Just because somebody doesn't have a criminal record doesn't mean that we should cut them some slack. He says, I do not share or endorse the comments made. Our focus remains on enforcing the law and continuing our mission to make Jacksonville a safer place for all residents. Jacksonville, of course, is going to be one of those places where there's a high propensity for these people to go because it's a big city. As sheriff, I want to reaffirm that our agency has and always will work hand in hand with our state and federal partners to uphold the laws and priorities established by our elected leaders. It's simple. When you encounter an illegal alien, deport no matter what, period. And that is all that I ask from law enforcement agencies. Continue to work with ICE. If you come across an illegal alien, regardless of their criminal status in terms of having a record, deport them. They must leave this country. They have been given every opportunity to do so, make some money, and get a free plane ticket. And if they choose not to do so, if they come across your path, kick them the hell out. Walker75 says, you are great, Zach. Love listening to you. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Q Patriot Angel says, challenge accepted. Thank you for that. I really do appreciate it. I don't know, Lisa, I don't know. I mean, I would probably say no. Just because, I mean, like, if you married into, like, I mean, Sheriff Grady Judd has been, like, the most based sheriff in the state of Florida. He's done great work going after the pedophiles and doing all those raids and stuff. But yeah, I would hazard a guess and say no. But the thing about it is that there are a lot of people, business owners down here in Florida, who are going to be donating to political campaigns. And it's very possible that somebody got into, because the sheriff is an elected position, it's very possible somebody with money said, hey, listen, I got a whole bunch of these guys. They're great guys. They're working, doing roofs for me. Maybe they drink a little cerveza at lunchtime, but hey, we got a lot of houses to build down here in Florida. We can't get rid of these people because then we'd have to hire Americans. And, that's going to cost a lot more money. And there's already a lot of pressure on the housing market, yada, yada, yada. These are fallacious arguments. Illegals should not be here. They are taking jobs from Americans. Their kids are taking up space in American schools. You and I are paying for their children to go to school. It's not fair to Americans. If you are here in this country illegally, you should not be here and you should be removed. Now, Andy Ogles appeared on, looks like, InfoWars to talk a little bit more about his Assimilation Act and putting American workers first, because this is a huge part of why the open immigration system that's been operating here in the United States has destroyed the American workforce.
Well, not to get too far in the weeds, I have the Assimilation Act, which goes back and repeals the 1965 Hart-Celler Act.
Yeah, poorly built houses. You're absolutely right.
And so what is that? It allowed for the invasion that's taken place over the last 50, 60 years. And so when you hear words like chain migration, when you hear words like the H-1B visa scam, that all goes back to the Hart-Celler Act. And so what my bill does is it repeals that, and it gets back to common sense. Look, if you want to come to this country, there's a provision in this bill. You have to show that you have a marketable skill, that you have the means to provide for yourself so that you don't end up on welfare. Whereas 60% of the Afghanis that have come here to the United States are on welfare. You look at, 80%, 78, 80% of the Somalis that are here in this country are on welfare. No, come here, pick up a hammer, go to work, be a part of our community, contribute. And so my bill fixes that. It also allows us to look at your social character. So are you a criminal? What we've seen over the last 20, 30, 40 years is that individuals will have criminal records in Mexico or Central or South America. We're talking about murderers, rapists, violent assaults. You know what happens when they come here? They murder, they rape, and violent assaults. And my bill will allow us to make sure those people never come to this country. If you're affiliated with a gang like MS-13 or Trinidad Agua, some other violent group, you cannot come into this country. But again, those are the type of things that Americans want. That's an 80-20 issue, meaning 80% of Americans, Republican, Democrat, black, white, man, woman, it doesn't matter. They want to know that the person or persons that are coming here actually want to be here, that they're not going to kill them. That's a reasonable expectation. My bill fixes that.
I like Andy Ogles, and I love the Assimilation Act. This is something that is sorely needed. Again, this is a welcome change to our immigration system that I support wholeheartedly. Sherman 2009 says, as a Canadian that has looked into immigrating to the USA, it is hard and expensive. Even having worked for heavy equipment suppliers, I can't seem to find a path to get out of communist Canada. Have you considered applying for refugee status? Because I know that there are Americans applying for refugee status to Canada. There are many different reasons why the Canadian government has infringed upon your rights, making it not safe for you to simply express yourself or to engage in political discourse. I have not looked into the immigration process specifically, but it's disheartening to me that it would be difficult for you to get here, and it seems to be so easy for so many people to come here. It's really unfortunate, and we need to make it possible for good people to come to the United States of America and do it easily. Now, continuing on the conversation about illegals and illegal activity, we have a new scandal that Ilhan Omar has just been exposed for participating in, allegedly. She has been funneling millions of dollars to a healthcare clinic that just happens to be run by her sister. A recent report has revealed that Representative Ilhan Omar is now being accused of directing taxpayer dollars to a Minneapolis health clinic that's run by her sister, Sar Noor. Noor served as CEO of the People's Center Clinic and Services, or PCCS, It's a nonprofit health center. She served there from July 2014 to April of 2018. That was the height of the Somali migrant fraud in the state of Minnesota. And during that time, the clinic wrapped up large amounts of public funding, which is now obviously in the spotlight because many are pointing to Omar's role in creating, pushing, and signing off on legislation influencing those allocations of federal dollars to the clinic. Funding for the PCCS includes about $33 million in grants from HHS beginning in 2002, $2.2 million from Minnesota's 2017 state capital budget, approved right after Omar started her term in the Minnesota House of Representatives, $1 million in federal funding secured by Omar in 2022, an additional $1 million in federal funding also secured by Ilhan Omar in April of 2024. Now, of course, Ilhan is denying any wrongdoing. However, these allegations come as Ilhan Omar is currently being investigated for the sudden tremendous jump in her wealth, as detailed on her 2024 congressional disclosure forms, showing a net worth of upwards of $30 million. If you remember, in her 2023 report, she reported a worth of somewhere between $40,000 and $250,000. She has said publicly that wealth comes from her husband's winery, but that winery appears to be non-functional. There are no sales, there's no on-site operations, and there are multiple lawsuits filed for the defrauding of investors. Ilhan Omar, of course, has also been implicated in the massive $9 billion Somali migrant fraud in Minnesota. We know that she was close with some of those convicted fraudsters from Feeding Our Future. She held campaign events. She went and did public relations photo opportunities with them. She both introduced and pushed the very bill to remove those safeguards for certain welfare programs, including school nutrition, which is exactly how the fraud from Feeding Our Future was able to take place. She hosted that 2018 congressional victory party at the Safari restaurant that was owned by convicted fraudster Salim Ahmed Saeed. He stole over $12 million by fabricating meal claims and then spent the money on personal luxuries. In May of 2020, Ilhan Omar was featured in a promotional video at Safari praising the program's community impact, though she later condemned the fraud as reprehensible. You also had a former campaign staffer for Omar, Guhad Hashi Saeed, who also pled guilty to stealing $3.2 million. Another aide, Ali Isi, defended Feeding Our Future at a 2021 event, criticizing state scrutiny as being somehow racially motivated. And of course, Ilhan Omar's campaign received $7,400 in donations from 3 of the indicted fraudsters, but she says she didn't know about the fraud. But she said she would have still pushed to remove those safeguards from the nutrition program, and then later saying the fraud took place because there wasn't enough safeguards. Wow. Here she is with her sister. Here she is at the People's Clinic, along with all of the other people that worked there. Here is her celebrating the opening of the People's Center Clinic, made possible by over $2 million I got for them in the Minnesota House and Delta Dental funding. Here she is with that convicted Feeding Our Future fraudster who stole tens of millions of dollars. What's going on with the investigation into Ilhan Omar? I'd really like to know. Hopefully, the reason we haven't heard anything is because her crimes are so vast. Every time they turn over a new rock in Minnesota, it leads to fraud committed by Ilhan Omar. Let me say thank you to Filter Dog. Don't forget to bring a towel. Intolerant Leftist says, doesn't the pathway to citizenship already exist through the formal legal process to become a citizen? Amen, sister. Yes, that's exactly it. The only problem is that when those people come here illegally, they forego that pathway to citizenship. If they do what the DHS and the government wants them to do and takes that cash stipend and a free airplane ticket to leave the country and go back to their country of origin, they can immediately apply. But the problem is they don't want to apply to do it legally. They are hedging their bets that if they just stay here in the United States of America, if they can hide out long enough, that eventually they will get the amnesty that they're looking for, which is why we cannot, under any circumstance, offer that to them or hint that that might even be a possibility. Every single illegal alien in this country, regardless of current criminal status, must be removed from our land. All right. Now, we have a new announcement coming from the Department of Justice. A case file has just been filed to revoke the citizenship of a mastermind behind a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. This is coming from the U.S. Attorney in, oh, shucks. Here we go. So this is in Baltimore, Maryland. This is one of those rare cases where denaturalization is occurring because the person who committed the fraud came to the United States and gained their citizenship the right way. That man's name is Emmanuel Oluwatson Kazeem. He's a native of Nigeria. He organized a vast conspiracy to steal identities and then file fraudulent tax returns. In 2017, he was convicted of 19 counts of mail and wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud, and he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But in 2024, President Biden commuted his sentence after only 6 years. Isn't that interesting? The Trump administration will not permit wrongdoers to retain U.S. citizenship that they were never entitled to in the first place. Assistant Attorney General Brett Shumate of the Justice Department Civil Division has said. U.S. citizenship is a privilege, and we will continue to ask courts to revoke that status that was obtained through fraud and deceit. So the newly filed denaturalization complaint alleges that Kazeem's fraud scheme, which he committed in the years before and after his naturalization, along with the concealment of his crimes, precluded him from obtaining that naturalization lawfully. The complaint also alleges that Kazeem had, prior to his fraud scheme, engaged in a sham marriage to obtain permanent resident status, and then he married a second woman, further disqualifying him from naturalization. Court documents and evidence presented at his trial show that in May of 2013, a victim in Medford, Oregon, notified the IRS there was a false federal and Oregon state tax returns that were filed electronically using her and her husband's personal identifying information, including their social security numbers and dates of birth. There was an IRS investigation that led to search warrants of residences in Illinois, Maryland, and Georgia. This was a multi-state scam ring he was doing, and to numerous email and instant messenger accounts that were all used by Kazeem and a number of other co-conspirators. Once they got to a Chicago residence, agents seized approximately 150 prepaid debit cards, along with $50,000 in money orders. In Maryland and Georgia, agents seized more than 50 electronic devices, 40 money orders in excess of $29,000, $14,000 in cash, and numerous prepaid debit cards containing over $12,000 in fraudulent returns. The search warrants helped identify Kazeem as the ringleader in the mastermind. Now, the scheme resulted in the conspirators possessing stolen personal identifying information of more than 259,000 victims. Kazeem purchased more than 91,000 identities from a Vietnamese hacker that originated from an Oregon company's private database. That company provided pre-employment and volunteer background checks for thousands of clients. Kazeem divided the identities into batches. He shared them with other co-conspirators, and then they used them to file fraudulent tax returns between 2012 and 2015. So in carrying out this scheme, Kazeem trained and directed his co-conspirators, including his younger brother, Michael, to use the stolen data to obtain thousands of electronic filing pins to bypass IRS authentication procedures. They acquired over 19,500 e-file pins during the course of this conspiracy. He also used the taxpayers' personal information to gain unauthorized access into many of their IRS transcripts. That also contained additional taxpayer PII and financial information. They would then use these prepaid debit cards with the victim's stolen identities to receive direct electronic tax refund deposits from the IRS. In total, he was linked to 10,139 fraudulent returns, attempting to get over $91 million in refunds, and he successfully received over $11.6 million. The refunds were withdrawn from the debit cards, at least 2,000 wire transfers. Over $2.1 million were sent back home to Nigeria. Over 700 of those wire transfers, totaling almost $700,000, were directly linked to Mr. Kazeem. He also used the conspiracy windfall to place nearly $200,000 down payment on a brand new home and to purchase a $175,000 townhome, both in Maryland. His average monthly credit card payment during 2012 to 2015 was over $8,300. And Kazim attempted to use those ill-gotten funds to develop a $6 million four-star hotel in Lagos, Nigeria. So in 2015, he transferred the townhome to his sister for $10, and he included her on the deed to his Maryland residence for another $10, and then he was arrested the next day. On June 20th of 2018, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison, ordered to pay over $12 million in restitution. But for some inexplicable reason, on December 12th, President Joe Biden commuted the sentence along with 1,500 others who had been serving under house arrest following their release from prison due to conditions related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So now he is being deported, he is being denaturalized, and it is the best news I have heard in a long time. All right, now, before we continue with our segment on the latest in fraud taking place around the country, here's a little inside scoop that many people on Rumble, other creators, are talking about. It's behind the scenes. It's in front of the scenes. It's actually one of the reasons I love using Rumble. They've made a great way to super chat creators so that we get paid immediately and without any fees. If you guys know this, on YouTube and Twitch, they can take up to 50% of the fees that you intend to use to donate to tip creators. This method here takes none. That's right. The platform is going to take zero fees. I get to keep nearly 100% of what you guys send. And you can super chat with Bitcoin, Tether USD, or even Tether Gold as well. So the tip shows up in the Rumble super chats. I will do my best to read it. I always do. Rarely do I miss one, but all you need to do is download the Rumble Wallet app. It's on the App Store, and then you can send tips directly to your favorite creators. You sign in with your Rumble credentials, and then it knows exactly who you're already subscribed to. It makes it pretty easy. You can also just go directly to wallet.rumble.com, or you can download the app directly from the App Store by just going through your device. Seriously, it's an amazing way to get rid of the middleman, to take the bank out of the equation, and to support content creators that you love and support the creator economy. So a big shout out to Rumble for making this disruptive new technology and making it possible for people to donate using crypto. Appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, the next story that we're going to discuss is actually an update from James O'Keefe on their recent report coming out of California. First, the Office of the Governor commented, and now the California Secretary of State's office has commented as well. Under California law, it is illegal to give money or other valuable consideration to another in exchange for their signature or, on an initiative petition. It is also a crime to circulate, sign, and or file those signed petitions with an election official, any initiative petition that is known to include forged names. The California initiative process is an important part of our democracy, and those who abuse our system will be held accountable. That's great. They are stating the obvious, but as far as I know, the California State Attorney General's office has not begun any investigations. Perhaps the only investigation that I'm aware of is the comment that was made by U.S. Attorney Bill Asaley after James O'Keefe had released his initial report. Now, since that time, Cam Higbee, who's another on-the-street citizen journalist, he also filmed people doing the exact same thing in California. So for all intents and purposes, this has not slowed down at all after James O'Keefe and now Cam Higbee have exposed it. And even there was the other video that I showed you guys last week, which appeared to show the exact same thing. So I would suggest that we are probably going to see some indictments coming rather quickly. Bill Asaley seems to move pretty quickly on this, and obviously he and others in the DOJ want to see this kind of stuff stop. So looking forward to that. Now, good news on the possibility of people who may be less than desirable coming to the United States of America and seeking some type of permanent residence, citizenship, or maybe even just getting a visa. Because Secretary Rubio has just added a $15,000 fee on a dozen additional countries where foreigners may be trying to get an American visa. Most of these countries are in Africa, but a total of 50 countries have this fee currently. This fee is obviously designed to discourage visa fraud from taking place and ultimately harming Americans. So these new countries that have been added to the list are 12 additional to the original 38, but you've got now added Cambodia, Ethiopia, Georgia, Grenada, Lesotho, Mauritius, Mongolia, Mozambique, Nicaragua, Papua New Guinea, the Seychelles, and Tunisia. So Rubio had previously said our visa system, who you allow to visit your country, should reflect the national interest, and we have said that from the beginning. It is not an obligation for us to give you a visa. It is our prerogative. Essentially, this $15,000 retainer that will have to be paid if you want to apply for a visa means that the only people who are going to pay that are people who can afford it, which means they're not going to come here and get on welfare. And they're people who are most likely serious about coming to the United States and adding to the national fabric.
Our visa system, okay, who you allow to visit your country should reflect the national interest.
Okay, this is actually an older clip, so we're not going to play that. But I believe we have a comprehensive list right here. Nope, unfortunately, this is only the announcement. So they're expanding that, and this will not just apply to people getting any kind of visa, but also people getting B1 or B2 visas. So these are business and tourism visas. These are frequently visas that are abused for people to get into the United States, and then they overstay those visas and they just disappear out into the wide expanse of the United States. So the bond is returned to visa recipients who come home in compliance with their visa. So if you overstay, then the United States is going to hold on to that $15,000, and likely they're going to come after you anyways. So I love this as an idea. Anything we can do to make it more difficult for people. Now, returning to a subject that we've actually spoken about previously, you might remember maybe a month or so ago, there was a whistleblower for the U.S. Postal Service who had come forward. It was kind of when the conversation about non-English speaking, foreign-born truckers were really taking over the national conversation, because frequently, like almost every day, it seemed like we were having an issue with them getting into accidents and killing people, or you've got people who don't speak English driving the wrong way down the freeway and inexplicably not being able to figure out how you're supposed to drive in the United States of America. So earlier today, Congressman Brandon Gill was actually interviewing in a hearing the United States Postal Service. Who is he? He's the Postmaster General, okay? Now, at the beginning of the year, they were supposed to stop using people who don't speak English or who are non-domiciled CDL drivers. And apparently the post office decided that it was just going to be too expensive, and they backtracked on this proposal. And at this point, Brandon Gill is saying that he's speaking with people inside postal distribution warehouses, and as much as 50% of these drivers are non-domiciled and cannot speak the language.
Do you know how many of the drivers who haul mail for USPS are using non-domiciled CDLs?
To my knowledge, at this point, none.
Do you know if it's a lot or just a few?
None.
So from what I'm hearing from mail processing centers, there's been quite a few. In fact, I've heard from several large ones who have said something to the extent about half of the drivers who are coming to pick up mail appear to be non-domiciled, that they typically don't even speak English. I've heard that over half of them don't.
Cruxy Hunctuary, if Cruxy Hunctuary, or however you say your name, if he disagrees with the situation with Iran, I've done already a segment on the situation in Iran earlier in the show. I don't mind that you disagree. That's not a problem. And people should not be offended if you disagree. But if you would like to go back and watch any of the other shows where I've talked about the situation in Iran, feel free to do so. We've already talked about it. So if you want to talk to the people in the chat about it, that's totally cool. Nobody should be offended if he doesn't agree with you.
There's been suggestions that many of them are perhaps illegal aliens. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not sure where that information comes from, but
it's coming from major mail processing facilities.
That probably wouldn't surprise me.
Do you know how many of the drivers?
So first of all, he lies. He says that there are no non-domiciled, non-English speaking drivers working for the post office when we already know that that's not the case. Brandon Gill calls him out. I love to see it. And I wonder if that would be considered to be perjury right there. All right. Now, good news. Media Matters for America's Kate Abigazela, the girl who needed to put some ice on her ass after getting tossed by an ICE official outside of the ICE facility in Chicago, Illinois, has lost her congressional race in a three-way primary. So this was going to be in Illinois' 9th congressional district. Oh, by the way, she is still facing felony charges for her obstruction of ICE facility employees there in Chicago. So she's being indicted along with 5 others for conspiring to impede the work of a federal law enforcement officer. Remember, according to the indictment, the defendants were among a crowd of people who surrounded a government vehicle with the intent to hinder and impede the driver. She stood right in front of a number of ICE vehicles trying to stop them from entering or leaving the facility. These federal agents were attempting to engage in the enforcement of United States immigration and customs enforcement there at the Broadview facility. The incident in question happened on September 26th. The defendants and others allegedly crowded together in front and on the side of the government vehicle, stood in its path, banged on the car and windows, and pushed against it to hinder and impede its movement. Those conspirators broke one of the windows on the vehicle, one of the side mirrors, and the rear windshield wiper. They etched a derogatory message into the body of the vehicle. And Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said at the time, no one is above the law, and no one has the right to obstruct it. Federal agents perform dangerous, essential work every single day to enforce our immigration laws and keep our communities safe. When individuals resort to or force or intimidation to interfere with that mission, they attack not only the agents themselves, but the rule of law they represent. The Department of Justice will never tolerate such conduct and will continue to hold accountable anyone who seeks to impede federal law enforcement operations. If you'll remember in this interview here, I played this for you right after she was indicted. She was asked about the actions she took. I believe that the podcaster played the video of her impeding ICE enforcement operations, and then Kat Abigazela hung up on the Zoom call and just left. She did not want to talk about it. Let me see if the article has the video of her getting tossed on her ass. It doesn't. That's fine, but I'm going to go ahead and play it because every time I do, it brings a smile to my face. And I also am extremely happy that she's not going to be the candidate come November. Okay. Kat Abigazela, ICE. Ice, ice, baby. Here she is. Oh, that's a good one. Hang on. I think that there's one that, there we go. Oh, God. Yeah, you're going to want to put some ice on that, sugar tits. Oh, I'm sorry. I should. That just came out. All right. Now, here is a new fraud that is coming out of California. Apparently, a state audit found evidence that California schools are issuing diplomas to foreign students in China. These are kids who have never set foot in California. They're basically guaranteeing that these kids from China are gaining admittance to over 100 American universities because they end up being given a diploma for an American school. So let's take a look at this video from Sonia Shaw. Never heard of her before, but here she's got the goods.
Guys, this is huge. A state audit found evidence that California schools are issuing diplomas to foreign students in China, kids who have never stepped foot here in California. We all know that Gavin Newsom's California has a huge corruption problem, but this audit just uncovered something completely unbelievable, and someone needs to finally be held accountable for this fraud, taking away from our children.
Now, the obvious question is, why would California public schools be offering Chinese nationals these American diplomas? The only thing that makes sense is that there must be some exchange of value. There must be a transfer of money that is taking place from the Chinese students to whomever it is in the California public school system from this very particular school that is giving these diplomas to these foreign nationals.
A public school district here in Riverside County called Val Verde Unified was caught issuing official California diplomas, complete with the district seal and the superintendent's signature, to students living in China, students who never stepped foot in a California classroom, students the audit actually confirms were not legally eligible to receive them. You heard me right. The Chinese school receiving those diplomas? Not accredited by a single organization. Yet, they were guaranteeing families admission to the top 100 American universities. You are hearing this right, and teachers were being pressured to make sure every student got the most perfect grades.
So there is also a major problem with regard to that, because for every Chinese national that is given preference because they have an American high school diploma to an American university, that's obviously one less spot for a real American who has actually gone to school here and who did the work necessary to get themselves into a college of their choice. Considering that these kids from China never set foot in an American institution, you also have to ask yourself if there was any sort of real-time instruction that was going on. Were they providing lesson plans for these Chinese students? Were they doing some type of distance education? Or is it merely a payoff that ends up resulting in a diploma with the signature of the superintendent and whomever is responsible for issuing it? There's clearly a number of ethical concerns. I don't know what the laws are in California, but this seems like something that is probably illegal, certainly fraudulent. Also, Bowler Jack Bryan says, put some ice on a chug of tits.
And all while this was happening, school officials were taking all expense-paid trips to China. Meals, travel, all paid for by the same foreign school. We have to get to the bottom of this. Was this a way for wealthy families in China to buy their kids' way into the American universities?
I think so, probably. All right, so that is the long and the short of it. Hopefully there's going to be an investigation into that coming up soon. We've also got a whistleblower, or a series of whistleblowers, coming forward in the form of a report having to do with the Mueller investigation. So, obviously, the Mueller investigation was a sham from the very start. In this New York Post exclusive, an FBI agent who was actually part of the Mueller team and the investigation into President Trump and a number of members of his campaign, alleging that he colluded with Russia in the 2016 election, he's come forward, and it's been shown that these allegations were actually made in December of 2020, after GOP Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley wrote a letter to Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel referencing some of these claims that were made back then. Why they weren't revealed at that time, I'm not exactly certain. But Grassley says these allegations confirm long-standing concerns that political bias rotted the decision-making process within the Mueller team. That should not be news to anybody listening. But from the outset, if this claim made by the agent is true, it's pretty clear that it was never an unbiased investigation. It was always a witch hunt, which is something that I think every single one of us had suspected or believed from the very start. So, in one glaring example of the bias in this investigation, former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe spoke of President Trump in a derogatory manner while on the record for an official interview. The agent claimed that the Justice Department prosecutors tried to pressure a female FBI agent to change the tone of the document to reflect that McCabe spoke about Trump without the negative connotation. Well, everybody knows McCabe hated President Trump, still hates President Trump, because he lost his FBI pension as a result of his behavior. But the female FBI agent refused to change the document, and she left the agent shortly thereafter while the Mueller probe was ongoing. Now, compounding these matters, some of those anti-Trump witch hunters held a flagrant disregard for security protocol An FBI agent alleged that Zanad Ahmad, the prosecutor for the Mueller probe and a protege of former Barack Obama Attorney General Loretta Lynch, was constantly breaking those protocols. For example, she brought classified documents to a meeting at the Washington field office without adhering to FBI security policy by bringing her classified notebook into the meeting without a proper carrying bag. What was worse, she came to the WFO from her residence. That means that she kept this notebook and these classified documents at her personal residence. Huge security lapse. The security protocol issue might infuriate you, regardless of whether or not you love or detest President Trump. It's especially infuriating considering what they did to President Trump with the raid on Mar-a-Lago. The FBI clearly at this time was operating in a biased and destructive manner. They were merely looking to destroy President Trump, investigating him and anybody that believed in him or was working for him so that they could try to ensure that he would never come back. If a fraction of the allegations that are made in this whistleblower document hold any water, it's yet another devastating blow to the Mueller probe. Many people at this point understand that Robert Mueller was most likely at that time dealing with some form of brain-related injury or sickness. More than likely, Mueller didn't do much of the work. He was merely a name and a face that they could attach to the investigation to give it this appearance of responsibility and some form of cachet in Washington, D.C. Zero credibility. It was always a partisan witch hunt from the very beginning, and I'm surprised that more information on that hasn't come out yet. All right. Thank you very much to Sean Joe for 2 cookies. Thank you to Intolerant Leftist for guessing the postmaster was trying to hide behind the fact that they're contractors, so they aren't employed by USPS. You know what? You're probably right on that. Just another creative use of the language so that they can avoid answering the question in an honest way. Sean Joe, thank you for 2 more cookies. He says, could be diplomas for China kids born in the USA during vacation births. It could be. Or it could just be Chinese citizens who have never set foot in the United States ever in their lives. But, of course, that has not been specified yet. All right, so tragically, Holloman Air Force Base was forced into a lockdown. The New Mexico base yesterday, there had a shooting that took place. 1 person was dead and 1 person was injured. So the base was placed on lockdown shortly after 5 p.m. yesterday. That would be about 7 p.m. our time, my time, Eastern, because there was an active shooter incident. Later, the lockdown was lifted. Military officials confirmed the scene was safe. Details regarding the shooter and the victim currently are being withheld, but by around 5:30 p.m., the base was placed on lockdown after reports of this active shooter. That 1 person who was dead, I'm going to take a guess and say that was probably the shooter. The person that was hurt was transported for medical equipment. It's at this point unclear if the people involved were actually military members, but I'm going to say it's probably likely. So we'll be waiting to get more information about the events that took place on the base. All right. Now, also good news in regards to fraud. It was said by Dr. Oz that certain types of medical fraud in the state of Florida were off the charts. And now that we've done investigations in a number of states, Florida is the next state that Dr. Oz is coming to. And the Trump administration is hoping to target for Medicaid fraud crackdowns. What's also good news about this is that Governor DeSantis and his government has already pledged wholeheartedly to support every effort that Dr. Oz wants to make down here in Florida to both identify and stop any type of fraud that may be happening within the Medicaid system. Dr. Oz said Florida has been a hotspot for healthcare fraud for years. Taxpayers and vulnerable patients deserve better. It's time for state leadership to step up and work with us to stop it. We're exposing the abuse, pursuing the fraudsters, and cleaning up the programs. So Oz sent a letter to Governor DeSantis and a number of other state leaders requesting that they share information on how exactly they identify, prevent, and address bad actors in the state Medicaid program. Same type of letter that he sent to New York, Minnesota, Maine, and California already. The announcement came, of course, right after President Trump and J.D. Vance had signed that executive order creating the fraud task force. The Attorney General for Florida, James Uthmeyer, shared the post that was made by Dr. Oz on X, and he said, just recently, our Medicaid fraud control unit arrested a man who was stealing Medicaid money meant to provide transportation services for disabled children, exactly like they do in Minnesota, Ohio, Maine, and elsewhere. Still no official investigation into Ohio yet. That's got to be coming. He continued by saying that the Medicaid system is overwhelmed with fraud and abuse, and we look forward to working with Dr. Oz on this issue. And then the chief of staff for Governor DeSantis also said, Florida has already been working closely with Dr. Oz and CMS to address this issue. We have zero tolerance for waste, fraud, and abuse, and we will aggressively deploy every resource necessary to root it out at the state level. Stay tuned. So the Office for DeSantis and the Florida Agency for Healthcare Administration did not directly comment on this, but I don't think that they're trying to avoid anything. We've already had Medicaid freezes in a number of states. Certainly, there's a large population of citizens down here in Florida who use Medicaid because they need it. That's the last thing that the state government wants to see happening. So I would anticipate this is probably going to end up with quite a few indictments in the state of Florida, and we'll see exactly how much money we can save the federal government. Okay, I actually already went over this one. We also have a case of fraud taking place in Louisiana. And this, oh my God, I keep getting these pop-ups for Norton. I have that website blocked, and I don't know how they are getting through because that should not be happening. There is something going on with Gateway Pundit where they are like forwarding websites, forwarding me to these fraudulent websites. I've deleted all my cache. I've deleted my history. I've blocked the website. I don't know how they're getting through. So anyways, this time it's an anti-police New Orleans defense attorney. She was just indicted on wire fraud last week. Her name is Tanzania Ruffin. She stole $250,000 from a client, and then she used the money to fund a lavish lifestyle. It's not the first time Miss Ruffin has been accused of criminal conduct. She was fired from an assistant district attorney job in 2004, allegedly for having committed extortion. Ruffin was fired from the DA's office more than 20 years ago on these extortion allegations. Now, the DA's office later dismissed the allegations, but the bar suspended her license for a short time period. This is an example of somebody who may not have a criminal record, but who obviously was implicated in criminal actions. It cost her her job at the DA's office. This is the exact same kind of thing that we want to avoid. If people have committed crimes, I think that they should be held to account. They must be prosecuted for those crimes. So in this instance, it was a federal grand jury who indicted Tanzania. She's 48 years old, committed wire fraud, violation of Title 18 USC Section 1343. According to the indictment, she defrauded approximately $250,000 from her client's family. She made numerous misrepresentations to the family regarding that $250K. She falsely told her client and his family that they had to compensate a New Orleans Police Department officer for various fictitious injuries and harms that the officer had allegedly suffered. Ruffin also falsely represented that she had confected a mutual non-disclosure agreement with the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office and the NOPD officer. Also, according to Ruffin, this fabricated NDA required her client's family to keep confidential any discussions about the financial settlement, meaning that these people would then believe that the $250,000 they gave her for this police officer was something that could never be talked about again. And of course, everybody else signed the NDA as well. So it's the perfect crime. She almost got away with it. But if she is convicted, she faces a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison, up to 3 years of supervised release, a fine of up to $250,000, and a payment of a mandatory $100 special assessment fee. This is her right here. Let's take a look and see if we can glean anything from her affect.
This defense attorney, Tanzania Ruffin, allegedly stole more than $250,000 from a client's family. An indictment a federal grand jury handed up Friday says Ruffin, quote, devised and intended to devise a scheme and artifice to defraud.
I mean, it's just embarrassing that that happens.
Federal prosecutors charge Ruffin with wire fraud and say she spent all the money on personal expenses. Authorities say Ruffin lied to the alleged victims, saying she needed the money to pay restitution to an officer their son had allegedly battered. prosecutors say she also asked them to sign a non-disclosure agreement to keep the settlement confidential. Ruffin's attorney, Carrie Kutcha, told Fox 8 in January Ruffin paid back $264,000 to the alleged victims. We spoke with him.
Well, that's good. That was my next question. Whether or not the family had gotten back the money that she had stolen from them. So the $250,000 in fees that she'll owe will likely end up going to the state of Louisiana then.
Monday afternoon.
I have had the opportunity to review it, but at this stage of the proceeding, it would be inappropriate for me to make any comment.
There's a lot of ways this could still go.
Despite allegations Ruffin stole around $250,000, she's only charged with wire fraud for $90,000. Fox 8 legal analyst Joe Raspani says that could mean more charges are coming, or that Ruffin's alleged conduct could be considered at a future sentencing.
They could modify the amount via a superseding indictment, or it could just be added in by the probation department who's writing up the sentencing report as relevant conduct. So we've got to see which way this is going to go.
Former Louisiana State Bar Association President Richard Leaf says consequences for Ruffin will likely go beyond the criminal charges if she's convicted.
Taking money from a client is an extremely serious matter. If that proves out that that's what she did, then disbarment is going to go through a process. It'll go to the Supreme Court. They'll make a decision.
Now, what else we should consider? 20 years ago, she was fired for extortion. That's 20 years of clients that Miss Ruffin, Tanzania Ruffin, may have taken advantage of during that time. I wonder how many other confidential non-disclosure agreements she allegedly had clients sign, along with large payments that were going to some person or another that ended up in her bank account. I would hope that the investigation doesn't just stop with this particular client and the $250,000 she grifted off of them. And I hope that if there are any other people out there who she defrauded, that they get justice as well. Next, we have another case of fraud, this time with a Black Lives Matter individual. Let's take a listen. This one coming out of Baltimore.
Home, a new report by Baltimore's Inspector General uncovers thousands in fraudulent billing and a breach in personal information by a youth crime fighting program called Sidestep. Sidestep was a part of Mayor Scott's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, or MONSE. Now, minutes ago, Mayor Scott reacted to the investigation's findings.
This report is not about MONSE. This is about some people who the Inspector General said are defrauding MONSE. So in this case, MONSE in the city would be the victim here.
Home, a new report by Baltimore.
All right, so not the first time that we have heard about this exact same type of fraud. Unfortunately, this has happened on a number of occasions. We've had situations where Black Lives Matter representatives have been running these types of diversion programs, either stealing money or, even worse, having the at-risk youth that they are supposed to be mentoring actually selling drugs for them or engaging in some other type of criminal behavior. Undoubtedly, we will learn more as this case progresses. Not cool. Let us continue on to the next story. This one, very disturbing. A former North Kansas City and Lee's Summit pastor was just suspended last week because it was discovered that she had worked for and managed the private island of the late Jeffrey Epstein. She did this for nearly a year. Her name is Reverend Stephanie Remington. And on Thursday of last week, Bishop Robert Farr for the Missouri Conference of the United Methodist Church placed Miss Remington on leave pending the investigation by the Episcopal Office. So Remington worked as Epstein's administrative assistant and temporary private project manager on that island, Little St. James, from August of 2018 until May of 2019. Now, Epstein was arrested, obviously, just 2 months later in July of 2019 on sex trafficking crimes, and then he was allegedly found dead in his cell by suicide, but obviously that's something we've gone over ad nauseum. Now, despite having worked so closely with Jeffrey Epstein, Remington allegedly told the United Methodist News that she never saw Epstein or anyone commit abuse on the island. However, she did admit that she knew Epstein was a registered sex offender, and he had served 18 months for soliciting prostitution from a minor when she accepted the job. So this pastor knew exactly the type of person Jeffrey Epstein was, and she still accepted the job, having absolutely no qualms about working with a person of his caliber and character. I never saw anything, Remington said. I knew him for the last 9 months of his life. Well, after he served time for the things that he was accused of doing. Now, he wasn't just accused of doing these things, Miss Remington. He was convicted of doing those things. And those things he was convicted of were greatly reduced, stepped down from the actual crimes that he had committed. Jeffrey Epstein ran a child trafficking operation out of Palm Beach. He would groom, pay, solicit, and abuse the children of West Palm Beach High School, the girls of West Palm Beach High School. And he would easily farm them out to his rich and famous friends that would come over and get massages with him. So it was later discovered that she worked there because her name appeared in these recent documents that came out on the Justice Department's Epstein website. Now, many of the files are emails that discuss her banal day-to-day operations. Right now, she's not accused of any crime. Her suspension is only temporary. They're going to let her come back after 90 days. And church leaders reported that they were only made aware of Remington's ties to Epstein, and they did not know anything about her previous employment. Apparently, she just left that off of her resume. But let's be honest, who's going to put that on their resume? I was the person in charge of Epstein's pedophile island from 2018 to 2019. Yeah, you're definitely not going to tell people about that. So the Missouri conference, they say, had no knowledge of this individual's association with Mr. Epstein. Clergy serving in extension ministry operate outside a local church environment and report their ministry setting through annual paperwork submitted to the conference. It sounds like she was actually a pastor working for this ministry at the time that she was also running operations for Jeffrey Epstein's island. No information indicating this association was disclosed in any of those reports. The bishop or district superintendent were not contacted about the individual's interest in or acceptance of the Epstein-related position. Now, before she worked for Epstein, she served as a pastor and associate pastor of several churches across Missouri from 2001 to 2018. We don't know why it was. She just decided to break bad in 2018 and go to work for a convicted pedophile. Her employment history includes 2 churches in the Kansas City metro, the First United Methodist in North Kansas City and the Summit United Methodist in Lee's Summit. What's interesting is that with nearly 20 years of employment history, she put everything else on her resume except for Pedophile Island. Now, according to the Missouri Conference, though, Remington claimed in her annual paperwork that she had performed extension ministry through the Lewis Center for Church Leadership at Wesley Theological Seminary during the time she worked for Epstein. As recently as 2025, she was saying this. However, as part of the early review process, they discovered Remington had actually not worked for the Wesley Theological Seminary for all the years that she had claimed, having been appointed as a part-time contractor in only 2017 and 2018. This alleged false documentation in congruence with the Epstein files has led the Missouri Conference to issue this suspension. Clergy are called to uphold the highest standards of spiritual and moral leadership. Concerns of this nature are taken seriously and require careful review. We recognize the deep harm connected to Mr. Epstein's crimes and remain in prayer for survivors who deserve healing and justice. Yeah, damn, that's the minimum they can do. Let's see, 15 years ago, she got charged again. Oh, look at that. Tanzania. Thank you very much, Trisha. And she says, oops. Oh, she was referring to the 2005 charge. Okay. All right. Not a problem. All right. Now, final stories here. A school principal in Oregon's Rainier School District has just been sentenced to more than 5 years in state prison. You see, he pled guilty to possessing and sharing child sexual abuse material. Now, a few months before that, he was placed on paid administrative leave because he made public posts trashing Charlie Kirk immediately following his assassination. The man you see before you, Jeremy Peter Williams of Longview, Washington, served as a principal at Rainier Junior and Senior High School since 2022. Williams was arrested on September 16th by the Cowlitz County Sheriff's Office on charges of dealing in depictions of minors engaged in sexually explicit conduct and the possession of those depictions just days after Charlie Kirk was killed. It's interesting. It seems like maybe he came onto the radar of officials because of the conduct that he engaged in after Charlie Kirk was murdered. Damn it, it's doing it again. Okay. But the good news is that they got him, they indicted him, they tried him, and he's now going to prison. So the investigation began after the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children issued multiple referrals in August. They flagged a number of accounts that were linked to Williams on platforms like Discord and Kik that often are places where people trade in CSAM material. Detectives executed a search warrant at Williams' Longview home. They seized phones, computers, and digital devices. Authorities recovered at least 31 images of this abuse material, including one depiction of an actual act involving an infant. Disgusting. Prosecutors noted the images involved vulnerable victims, but emphasized there was no evidence that any of the children were from the Rainier Public School System. The investigation ultimately led to the discovery of at least 31 images, and Mr. Williams was under circumstances where he could gain access to vulnerable victims, most egregious of which appears in particular to involve that picture that I mentioned with an infant. He pled guilty in January to only 3 counts of possession of depictions of minors engaged in these behaviors. That was part of his plea deal. The Cowlitz County Superior Court judge overseeing the case, Thad Scudder, has now sentenced him to 61 months, just over 5 years in prison. After that, he'll have 36 months of community study, which is probation. He must now register as a sex offender for only 15 years. After 15 years, he doesn't have to do that again in Oregon, apparently. He does have $3,000 in court fees. He has been ordered not to have any contact with minors or access the internet except under strict conditions during his earlier release period. And in a pre-sentencing interview, he told investigators he began writing erotic short stories involving children to feel popular and powerful online, eventually leading to the sharing of these explicit images. And he also admitted to exchanging material that included that horrific video of a 6-month-old infant and claimed that he had won competitions for his writing. And finally, Cesar Chavez has just been exposed as a pederast as well. Now, several organizations have canceled celebrations for this month's Cesar Chavez Day because allegations have now finally surfaced that this man was engaged in sexually inappropriate behavior with both adults and children. There are few specifics that are publicly known about these allegations. The Cesar Chavez Foundation described a statement about them as disturbing. The United Farm Workers of America Union also said that they were deeply troubled by the allegations, and they do not have firsthand knowledge of these allegations, but the Cesar Chavez Foundation has said that allegations of Chavez engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with women and minors stem from Chavez's time as president of the United Farm Workers. This is a position he held until his death in April of 1993. We are deeply shocked and saddened by what we are hearing. Now, the UFW, the CCF said, was established as a safe and confidential process for victims to share their experiences of abuse and voluntarily participate in reparation and reconciliation efforts while also working to promote and strengthen a safe and welcoming workplace culture. We ask for our community's patience as we learn more. Throughout this process, our organization and our partners in the movement will continue our work together to protect and uplift families and communities that we serve. Now, Chavez, widely celebrated as a labor and civil rights leader who campaigned for better pay and working conditions for farm workers. They just made a movie about this guy not that long ago. His birthday is this month, March 31st. That's when they celebrate Cesar Chavez Day. You may have a Cesar Chavez Avenue in your hometown. But now, following the allegations, all events have been canceled across the country. The foundation, UFW Foundation, a separate nonprofit charity, has also canceled all Cesar Chavez Day activities this month And they say the allegations against Chavez go against everything we stand for. For nearly 20 years, the UFW Foundation has worked to advocate, organize, and provide direct services that protect and serve farm workers and immigrants, many of whom are women, and many of whom have shared their painful stories with us. We know it is difficult and painful, and the healing and safety of survivors is of the utmost importance to us. I just want to say, I don't believe that suddenly now, in 2026, for the very first time in history, people have come forward to say Cesar Chavez was a pederast or Cesar Chavez was a rapist. I think that this was probably known to people a long time ago, and it was covered up because Cesar Chavez is like a sacred cow among the migrant farm worker community. He's a hero of the left. And of course, they wouldn't want to blow their wad on having Cesar Chavez be exposed as a pedophile, and they can't make money off of his name anymore, and he no longer is a hero. Chafed Bum says, andale, andale, arriba, arriba, let's go, wet Zach. The wife is tired of waiting. We are about to close out the show right now, and I just need to go through these final thank yous over here on Rumble and on Pilled. Let me get this pulled up real quick here, and let's see. All right, final word over here. Our good friends over at Rumble Premium. You guys, you've probably noticed Rumble is growing fast. They're not slowing down anytime soon. They're building a real alternative to big tech that's going to put creators first and actually protect free speech. Now there's Rumble Premium. It's an easy way to upgrade your experience. With Premium, you get ad-free viewing across the platform, no pre-rolls, no interruptions, just the content that you came for. Plus, Premium members unlock exclusive content like bonus videos, behind-the-scenes drops, and even more from your favorite creators. Right now, Rumble is offering $10 off an annual subscription. You can pick this up by heading to rumble.com/premium and using the promo code STUDIO at checkout. Once again, that's rumble.com/premium. Use the promo code STUDIO and you will see no more ads. You'll get more freedom and you'll get more content that you actually care about. That's the deal. You can also use that QR code on screen right there. All right, final thank yous. Let's see. Sean, oh, actually, no, that was it over on Pilled. So that will be all. All right, you guys, I want to thank everybody for being here. I hope you have a wonderful night. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So anyways, in case you have not heard, there will be no Altered State tonight. I am taking the next week or so to determine how best to fill that time slot. It's going to have to be a different show. I need to figure out what that's going to look like, and I will be, obviously let everybody know here. If you don't watch Altered State or you didn't watch Altered State, then of course you can always join us once again tomorrow at 5 p.m. for another episode of Red Pill News Live. I will be doing Taking It Back with Adel and Frank tomorrow at 4, so maybe I'll see you there, maybe I'll see you here. But in the meantime, good luck, God bless. I'm going to pass out these gold pills, and I am also going to send you on a raid. We'll see you next time. Peace.